Hi everyone, we hope you're doing well. We're hanging in there though honestly, we haven't been getting much sleep lately. Today, we want to answer a question we get a lot: how do we publish our audiobooks? First, we post most audiobooks on Patreon as paid content. They stay paid for a few months. After that, they become free to listen to on Patreon forever. A few weeks later, we post them on other places like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, X. Lately, things have been a bit slow in terms of new members. So we'd love your help. Please share our site with your friends or in places like Facebook groups, Twitter, X, Discord, Reddit, or novel forums. Even one share can really help us grow. Thanks so much for your support, which were designed to slow down the Naruto advance when they finally arrived in Germanic space. After the war ended in a Germanic victory, the Grand Admiral of the Imperial Navy set forth on overhauling the Dovrakian civilization so that it was suited for the harsh reality of the universe. Their borderline pacifistic ways had come to an abrupt and bitter end. Instead, the Dovrakian society had been overhauled from the ground up to mimic the Germanic Star Empire. Considering that the Germanic Star Empire had a specific distaste for alien life, their requirement for vassalization was fairly unique when compared to other civilizations. They did not desire a yearly tribute of resources and wealth, but rather the so-called human resources that the Dovrakian race had left over after the war. Despite the overwhelming destruction that the Dovrakian species endured over the past year, as a result of the Germanic invasion, they still had a population that was vastly larger than the Germanic Star Empire. After all, the Germans had only managed to settle 100 worlds, while the Dovrakians had settled over 3 times that amount. Thus, as part of their preparations for the upcoming Naruto invasion, Grand Admiral Emrys issued an edict to his newly conquered subjects. Every citizen capable of bearing arms in the newly formed Dovrakian Social Republic, whether male or female, was to be conscripted into military service effective immediately. Naturally, to accommodate his massive influx of military personnel, the Admiralty had agreed to temporarily integrate the newly formed Dovrakian Republican Guard into the already existing Germanic military. Thus, as of this moment, there were billions of Dovrakians who had begun serving on imperial vessels, and alongside Germanic Star Marines, something which much of the Germanic armed forces did not appreciate. As for Eric, he found himself stationed on the frontiers of the Empire's new borders, on a world the Dovrakians called Kelvornax. It was a continental world with a wide range of climates. In many ways, this world was similar to Earth, albeit significantly smaller, as the planet was roughly the size of Mars. Currently, Eric and the other members of the Black Sun Squadron were tasked with training these new Dovrakian pilots on how to effectively use their light fighters in combat. With Eric being given the painful job of instructing a young Dovrakian woman by the name of Salith, who had failed the test to become certified as a starfighter pilot multiple times now. Why the Admiralty had believed that individual training with one of their best ace pilots was the only way to help this young woman pass her exams, Eric did not know. But, regardless of his feelings about the task he had been given, the man was forced to endure this trial, and thus he watched in silence as his new student had yet again crashed into a planet's surface within the simulation. Salith was a beautiful young Dovrakian woman, with blood-red skin, matching eyes, and short silver hair. Her horns were rather short and were curled in a way that was akin to the fictitious succubus. She had a pair of bat-like wings, and a short devil's tail which jutted out of her backside. The woman's unusually curvy body was concealed with an olive-green flight suit, and currently she was emerging from the holodeck on board the carrier, with a rather excited smile on her pretty face. She rapidly approached Eric, before expressing her hopeful thoughts aloud. "So how did I do? Did I pass?" Eric looked at the girl as if she were an imbecile. He could not believe that she could somehow think that she had passed after that performance and was quick to scold her because of it. "Did you pass?" "Of course not. You literally crashed your starfighter into the fucking planet and killed yourself. Why on earth would I pass you?" The red-skinned beauty immediately pouted as she began to argue with Eric about her performance, and whether or not she deserved a passing grade. "What do you mean? I shot down that bug. Clearly, that means I did a good job." Eric was beginning to believe that this woman was indeed a moron and simply scoffed as he heard the drivel which came from this alien woman's mouth. As much as she might think she had done well in the simulation, reality was a far different story, and thus he was quick to reprimand Salith for her particularly sharp tongue. "You think you did well? You chased after a drone with no regard for what was in front of or behind you. Yes, you managed to shoot down the fucking bug as he was attempting to climb back into the atmosphere, but you immediately rammed into the planet's surface directly afterward. Never before in my life have I seen someone so inept at piloting a starfighter. How on earth you were selected to serve in this position, I will never understand, but one thing is certain. I will be putting in my recommendation that you should be transferred to another position. Even after a whole week of private instruction, you are still a danger to yourself and everyone around you when you are given access to a cockpit. If it was even remotely possible for Saleth's face to become any more red, then she was most certainly blushing in embarrassment at this moment, while pouting at the same time. Her cheeks were slightly puffed up, as if she had many things she wanted to say, but knew the man who was scolding her was correct in his assessment. Finally, she began to plead with Eric to reconsider his decision, as she latched onto the man's hand with her own, while firmly gripping it in place with her short claws. Eric winced in discomfort as he felt the woman's claws lock his hand in place, and though they were not breaking the skin, they were still unbearably uncomfortable. Please. Give me one last chance. I promise I will do better in the next simulation. Please, I'm begging you. The way the woman was avoiding her eyes from making contact with his own, while struggling to beg like a common dog, was somewhat endearing to Eric. And for the briefest of moments, he thought this living embodiment of a devil was actually quite cute. Rather than deal with the conflicted emotions that he currently felt, Eric looked away from the attractive demoness and sighed heavily before agreeing to give her one last chance. Alright, fine, I will give you one last chance to pass your flight certification. If you still fail to do so, then I will have no choice but to transfer you to a more fitting position in the Navy. A wide smile lit up on the woman's pretty face, as her incredibly sharp teeth were fully displayed. She quickly shook Eric's hand rather over-enthusiastically while thanking him for his benevolence. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I won't disappoint you. With this said, Eric sighed once more, before reiterating that this was indeed the woman's last chance to pass. Don't thank me yet. This is your last chance. So, in order to give you the best chances of success, we are going to spend the next month reteaching you the basics of flight and combat maneuvers. I cannot emphasize enough how much trouble I am going through to make sure you become a pilot, so do not waste my time. The fledgling Drakian pilot immediately snapped to attention and saluted Eric with a cheerful smile on her pretty face. Yes, sir. Like Eric had said, the two of them began spending a lot of time together, with Eric's entire schedule for the month being taken up with private lessons for this hopeless pilot. He honestly did not know why the Navy was wasting time and resources helping this girl become a pilot, but he was certain that she was closely related to somebody who held significant power and influence in the newly formed National Socialist Drakian Workers' Party, which was the new ruling entity of the puppet state. A full month had passed, and currently Eric was watching a holographic projection of what was going on in the holodeck, as Saleth began piloting her dagger for what might very well be the last time. The test was designed to mimic a real battlefield scenario, and the only way to achieve victory was through surviving until the very end and scoring a certain number of kills. The start of the scenario was quite easy, as all Saleth needed to do in the beginning was successfully take off from the carrier inside the simulation and head towards the battlefield with a wing of simulated comrades. The buxom demoness was breathing quite heavily as she struggled to cope with the anxiety that she currently felt. This anxiety only increased as she approached the battlefield, which was currently taking place over a simulated planet between the Germanic Navy and a Naraka Hive fleet, which was based upon Terminus. The Drakian pilot took a deep breath as she gripped her joystick with excessive strength. She then pushed the throttle forward as she immediately activated her targeting array so that it would lock onto the nearest drone. It did not take long for Saleth to catch up to the enemies, where she immediately opened fire with both her laser repeaters and plasma cannon to ensure that the maximum damage was dealt in the shortest amount of time. Within seconds the drone exploded, allowing Saleth to quickly pass through the remains which the insectoid life form had left behind. She then used her thrusters to strafe around her next target, which she immediately opened fire upon. As Saleth continued to fight through the scenario, Eric watched as her instructor, along with several other officers of the Germanic Starfighter Corps who were surprised to see that the alien woman who was a repeated flunky just a month ago had somehow so quickly gained a grasp for flying. One of the officers even made a comment about it. While Eric stared anxiously at the holographic projection, fearing that some of his students' bad habits might resurface during the test. Amazing. It was just a month ago that I was certain this girl would flunk out of flight school, but now she has already managed to get through half the simulation without sustaining any significant damage. How the hell did you manage to get her up to speed so quickly, Silber? Eric did not respond to this question, and instead he watched the projection closely, noticing that a Naraku Reaper, which was a specialized close-quarters fighter variant of the drone, was rapidly approaching her six. To which he instinctively reached out to his student with his telepathy, and in doing so, secretly violated the parameters of the test. Watch your six. Saleth assumed this was just her mind reminding her of what her instructor had drilled into her head over the last month, and thus she immediately looked behind her, to get a better glimpse of her rear, where she noticed the Naraku Reaper was about to latch onto her starfighter, and shred it to bits. Realizing that she had just narrowly failed the test, Saleth's heart nearly exploded from the anxiety she was currently feeling, but her body reacted quicker than her mind, as she quickly dived towards the surface in an attempt to lose the enemy, while strafing around her pursuer so that she could get a sight picture. Right when she saw the jaws of the insectoid latch out towards her starfighter, she used the plasma cannon which was mounted on a gimbal beneath the nose of her fighter, to unleash a storm of fire onto the bug, which caused it to explode right before it could rip open her cockpit with its mighty jaws and pincers. The explosion of the enemy target caused her ship to sustain some damage, but it was not enough to cause her to fail the test. Which after gaining control of her spiraling ship, Saleth shot back into orbit where she succeeded in taking out more drones and reapers, until the GSE fleet was ordered to retreat. Where she immediately headed back to the carrier and landed on its deck. The simulation came to an abrupt stop after her successful landing, and revealed her score, which was just above the passing grade. To which she jumped out of the holodeck in excitement and ran towards her instructor. Even she did not know why she kissed Eric, but the overt display of affection between the instructor and his student immediately caught the gaze of the other officers, who felt the need to report Eric for fraternizing with another species. After several moments of kissing a stunned Eric, Saleth released herself from his embrace, without even realizing what she had done, or why she had done it. Before thanking the man for his assistance in helping her reach her goals. I can't believe it. I actually did it. And it is all thanks to you. Eric was stunned into silence, and even felt quite violated by the long snake-like tongue that had forced its way into his mouth. He looked in shock at his peers, who were giving him a disapproving glance, as if to say that they would definitely be reporting him for this incident to their superiors. It was only now, after seeing the awkward glances between the Germanic officers, that Saleth realized she had done something incredibly inappropriate, and recoiled in shock as she bowed her head in an attempt to gain forgiveness for her rash and intimate actions. She was blushing so profusely that even Eric would be able to detect the change in skin color around her cheeks, but luckily for her, nobody could see this, as her pretty face was directly facing the floor. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I got so excited and did something entirely inappropriate. Please forgive me. I promise it won't happen again. Eric had no idea how to respond to this incident. In truth, he saw Saleth as nothing more than an irksome thorn in his side that the Admiralty had forced upon him. Although now he had to admit she was an extremely attractive specimen of her species, far more so than the women he had seen in Vrakian porn. Unfortunately for him, there was no way he could possibly pursue a relationship with an alien like Saleth, and without a doubt, he was going to get reprimanded for this one kiss that he had no control over. Thus, he forcefully calmed his rapidly beating heart before scolding the young woman for her actions. What you just did was a serious violation of the Empire's Naval Code of Conduct. I could even bring you up on disciplinary charges for this violation. However, with context I think I can reduce your sentence to a matter of cleaning the latrines. You may have passed your flight certification just now, but that is no excuse for your behavior. Report to the janitorial staff, where you will be serving a 3-month stint before you are permitted to join the rest of the pilots in your unit. Saleth had gotten to know Eric quite well over this last month of being together, and she had never seen him this angry before. It was almost enough to make her cry. In a hasty moment she had given this man her first kiss, and now he was disciplining her. She was just about to argue with Eric when she noticed the looks the other officers were giving him. In that moment she suddenly remembered the strict penalties that the Germanic Star Empire held for interspecies relations, and thus, she now realized how much of a taboo she had just violated. She may only be getting 3 months of janitorial duty, but Eric, who was a member of the Germanic race, he was definitely in for a whole mess of trouble thanks to her. And thus, knowing that he had been lenient with her, despite the harsh punishment he was about to receive, Saleth struggled to choke back her tears as she saluted Eric, and just barely managed to respond in affirmation to her new orders. Yes, sir. After saying this, Saleth ran off, no longer willing to face the man she had caused so much trouble for, especially after all the hoops he had jumped through to get her up to par with Imperial flight standards. As for Eric, he shook his head and sighed before looking sternly at his other officers. His words were not so much admission of guilt, but one of understanding just how boned he was for this mishap. All right, she is gone. You can both go run off now to your superiors and report me for something I had no control over. Fucking cunts. Surprisingly, the two officers looked at one another before breaking out into laughter. The higher ranking of the two men looked at Eric with what appeared to be envy before voicing his thoughts aloud. Bro, what was it like? This question shocked Eric, who raised his brow in disbelief before asking for clarification. What do you mean? What was what like? Contrary to what Eric expected, the clarification of the question did not come from the first officer, but the second one instead. Her tongue, obviously. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I've been wondering what they feel like since we first started our war with these sexy devils. To think you would actually get one to kiss you. Man, I mean officially I have to reprimand you for such a thing, but honestly, I'm so jealous. Hey, I remember now, you are that guy from the controversy a few years back, You know that pop star reposted an image of you with that sexy Anna babe. Did you seriously smash her as well? Eric looked at the two officers who appeared supremely interested in the subject, before scoffing in disbelief. No comment. After saying this, Eric walked away, where he could have sworn he heard the two men groan in defeat, with one of them even calling him a tease. It was only at this moment that Eric realized that there were more men in the Empire than himself who were sexually attracted to women from some of the more beautiful alien species. Chapter 38, a dastardly plot by the Gimdari Trade Union. While the Germanic Star Empire was currently in a phase of military buildup, an enemy they were not even aware they had begun to conspire against them. On the planet of Gimdari, the various trade princes had come together to speak about the recent conflict which the Germanic Star Empire had emerged victorious in, and about the Naraka Hive fleet which was approaching their borders. Vixel Golden Tooth was among the most powerful and influential trade princes within the Gimdari race. If their species had anything close to approximating a proper leader, he would be it. In truth, he had primarily been the one responsible for spearheading the propaganda campaign, which had turned much of the galaxy against the Germanic race. At first, he thought these pesky humanoid creatures from the Western Quadrant were a minor nuisance, one who refused to join the galactic economy, and thus enter the control of the Gimdari Trade Union. However, with the current mass military buildup which the Germanic Star Empire was undergoing, it was becoming increasingly clear to Vixel and several of the other trade princes that if left unchecked, the Germanic Star Empire would inevitably prove disastrous to the Gimdari race as a whole. Especially after they realized just how much the Goblinoid race had conspired against them. Even if the Germanic Star Empire did not directly seek out vengeance against the Gimdari, the very idea of them surviving, and eliminating a Naraka Hive fleet while being a regional power, would inevitably inspire other interstellar civilization to follow their path of self-sufficiency. If such a thing were to occur, then it would rapidly decrease the power and influence of the Gimdari Trade Union. This could not be permitted under any circumstances. Thus, Vixel Golden Tooth had summoned his peers to discuss how to prevent the Germanic Star Empire from surviving the onslaught of the Naraka Hive fleet, which was currently heading towards their borders. We can't allow these golden-haired shits to increase their military strength. It was bad enough when they began efforts to double the size of their armed forces just with their own population. However, after annexing the Dvrakian Consortium, they now have access to far more resources and manpower than what they were previously limited to. What we need to do is instigate a war, perhaps with a subgalactic power, so that the Germanic Star Empire wastes its resources that they have recently accumulated. This way, they will have a far lower chance of surviving the Hive fleet terminus. Another trade prince, who was just as ghastly in appearance as Vixel, was quick to nod his head in agreement before voicing his own opinion on the matter. It has become clear to me that this so-called Germanic Star Empire has become a threat to our continued power and influence over the galaxy. They have managed to achieve military power in parity with Tier 3 regional powers, while only holding 36 systems beneath their control. Now they have access to over 300. It is impossible to know just how much power and influence they will achieve in the coming years. It is only a matter of time before other interstellar civilizations try to emulate the Germanic society. We cannot allow this to happen, and since we cannot manipulate their economy, as it is entirely self-sufficient, we must manipulate another power into declaring war on the Germanic Star Empire. So long as they are not facing imminent extinction, the Alphaim Empress will not interfere with a military conflict. Thus, we can waste their resources until the Naraka take care of their pesky race once and for all. Despite the words of this specific trade prince, another and more hideous-looking elderly Gimdari by the name of Keld Silvergleam was quick to voice his disapproval with this plan, not because he found it to be unethical. No, there was not a single Gimdari would disagree with this proposal based upon something as inconsequential as morality. No, he disagreed with this plot specifically because he believed the fascination which the Alphaim Empress had her newest bits was something that his peers were underestimating, and thus he was quick to voice this concern. I believe you are all failing to realize how much of an infatuation Empress Lunaria Asterion has with the Germanic race. I have it on good authority that she has said some rather obscene things about her desires towards the men of the Germanic Star Empire, specifically their Grand Admiral, who currently seems to be leading the Empire in its efforts to prepare for the Naraka Hive fleet. She will naturally be able to detect any hostile moves we make towards her precious pets, and will not easily forgive them, especially as they are now fighting for their very survival. I believe if we were to encourage one of our puppets to declare war against the Germanic Star Empire, then it won't be long before the Alphaim Dominion mobilizes its forces to blockade our home world. If that happens, our wealth will vastly diminish, as will our control over the galaxy. Vixel's plump little fingers curled so much that his claws began to dig into the flesh of his palm. He gnashed his overly sharp teeth in response to Keld Silvergleam's words before voicing his distaste for the Alphaim Empress and her race as a whole. Those damned light elves, they think because their military is superior to our own, that they actually have a say in how far our influence spreads. Absolutely disgusting, the lot of them. If they were more easily manipulated, like their dark-skinned cousins, then perhaps we wouldn't be having this problem. Regardless of what that damned whore thinks, the Germanic Star Empire and their entire race must be eliminated. Their very existence is a threat to our power. And if the Alphaim Empress decides to get in our way, then we will just convince the other galactic powers to restrain her. No matter how powerful the Alphaim military is, they cannot win a war against the entire galaxy. As for their bitch of a crowned princess, she needs to be humbled. For such a foolish little girl to speak to me with those vile words, I think we need to teach her a lesson. We need to capture her alive and soil her purity. Perhaps after being sold to the Dark Elves, she will learn some proper respect. All in favor of coercing a subgalactic power to declare war against the Germanic Star Empire, and for the kidnapping of the Alphaim Crown Princess? The vote was unanimous as each and every trade prince within the Gimdari trade union agreed to start a war with the Germanic Star Empire via the use of a proxy, and to kidnap the Alphaim Crown Princess so that they could gift her to the Svartalfheim Federation as a pleasure slave. Almost immediately after the meeting between the trade princes took place, Lunaria received a call from Keld Silvergleam. He did not intend to warn Lunaria about the schemes of his peers simply out of the goodness of his heart, but rather out of greed. To the Gimdari, nothing was above wealth and power, even their own race. In fact, it was to be expected that at least one of the Gimdari trade princes would sell out their own kind in pursuit of a quick buck. After hearing everything that the elderly trade prine had to say, Lunaria gazed in disgust towards the hideous goblinoid creature, more so than usual. She was utterly furious that they had not only desired to drive her favorite pets into extinction but also were planning to go after her own daughter with such despicable methods. The fury a mother had when her children were targeted was not something easily calmed. And thus, she sent a substantial fortune to the trade prince, who had warned her while also returning the favor. Humphrey, how impetuous of your peers to think that they can get their hands on my precious daughter, and turn her into a plaything for those hideous dark-skinned freaks. All because she spoke the truth about your people. Well, I will show them. When Bixel's agents come for my daughter, I will have their genitals mutilated before feeding them to the wretches they belong to through a straw. As for the punishment that I have in store for your peers, I believe I will leave that up to my precious puppies. Once they have fully grown, I will tell them of what your despicable race has done to them, and what you all will continue to do throughout the coming years. Then I will watch as they latch their jaws around your gangly necks, before ripping out your throats with their sharp teeth. Naturally, I will spare the Silvergleam cartel, or at least make the best efforts to do so. But if I were you, I would flee from your so-called home world before the Germans arrive. Because when they do, it will not be easy to appease their fury. Not after they learn all which you have done to them. No, I believe only the extermination of your entire race will satiate their bloodlust. And I personally look forward to the day the name Gimdari is just an embarrassing memory in the history of the galaxy. It was only now that Keld Silvergleam was beginning to regret his decision to inform the Alphaim Empress of the plans that his peers had concocted. She was beyond furious, and it would appear that even though he had warned her in advance, she would not make much of an effort to spare him and his cartel when the day of reckoning finally arrived. Perhaps Bixel was right all along. The Germanic people needed to be erased from the galaxy, for if they were not, then it would mean disaster for the Gimdari race. After all, the Gimdari were not warriors, they were not skilled in the art of war. Their biology basically prevented them from being proficient in such noble pursuits. They were only good at coercing the other races to commit violence on their behalf. But with the rapid rate which the Germanic Star Empire was developing, and the animosity that the Alphaim Dominion now had towards the Gimdari trade union, it was only a matter of time before they found themselves embroiled in a war with two galactic powers. When that happened, perhaps even the combined might of the Azuran Cabal, the Svartalfheim Federation, and the Theocracy would not be enough to save his people. After all, the Germanic Star Empire had thus far shown a remarkable ability to punch above their own weight, and by the time they were truly a galactic power in their own right, whether this took a millennium, or 100, they would be able to effectively counter at least two galactic powers on their own. After all, even the most militant of the galactic powers, which was the Alphaim Dominion, admired the proficiency in which the Germanic race engaged in violence. Chapter 39, Dvrakian mating habits. With the war between the Germanic Star Empire and the Dvrakian Consortium now a thing of the past, Eric found that he had an exceptional amount of free time on his hands. When he was not training new pilots like Saleth, he usually spent time in the mess hall socializing with the other crewmen of the carrier. Despite the trouble she had caused him, Saleth did not appear capable of staying away from Eric, and thus, she almost always met up with him in the mess hall whenever he was there. How she was able to so expertly track his movements, when he did not operate on a fixed schedule, he did not know, but she had succeeded in doing this over and over again. After discussing his paranoia with another one of the recruits he was training, The man looked at Eric with an odd expression before explaining what was going on. However, he did so in a hushed voice as if what he was about to say absolutely could not be overheard by outsiders. This might sound like a weird question, but were the two of you physically intimate with each other in any way that would have exchanged body fluids? Eric was immediately taken aback by this question. He looked around to see if anyone was listening in on his conversation before responding in an equally hushed tone. Well, I mean, she kissed me. The Dvrockian recruit seemed to have come to a certain understanding as he nodded his head, as if the answer was obvious from the start. Upon seeing that Eric was still confused, the man sighed and shook his head before responding. Our species evolved to mate for life. And though some Dvrockians choose not to do so, it is still tradition. If bodily fluids are exchanged between two Dvrockians, whether it's a kiss, or something more intense, they will be able to sniff out that other person and their whereabouts so long as they are within a certain distance of one another, and it's a pretty large distance. I'm actually quite surprised by this news. You may not be aware of this, but it is a major taboo for a Dvrockian to be physically intimate with someone from another species. To put it in simple terms, by kissing you, Saelith has essentially made it impossible for her to ever mate with another Dvrockian, especially if news of this were to ever get out. I won't say a word about this to anyone, but yeah, that's why she is able to find you so easily. As long as the two of you are on the same ship, she will instinctively know where you are at all times of the day. This news had shocked Eric to the core of his being. It took him several moments to process what he had heard before he finally asked the immediate question on his mind. Are you saying that Saelith wants to mate with me? The Dvrockian recruit looked at Eric as if the man was as dense as a neutron star while he slowly nodded his head before responding in confirmation. Obviously. She would not have kissed you if that was not her intention. Even if she did it instinctively in a moment of great excitement, there is only one reason a member of our species would be so physically intimate with someone else. Though good luck ever getting into such a relationship with her. From what I hear, your species has actually made it a capital offense to engage in interspecies relations. Even I think that's a bit harsh. But every civilization has a reason for its rules and traditions, so I'm not going to judge. Despite saying this, there was a very clear look of disdain in the trainee's eyes, as if Eric's entire existence disgusted him. Perhaps it was partially out of jealousy, as well as cultural taboos. After all, Saelith was an exceptionally attractive member of her species, and for her to be taken by a foreigner, it was truly an intolerable offense to most Dvrockians. Naturally, Eric did not take offense to such an expression, because it was the same one which his entire species had looked at him with since the day he was born. He was more than used to being hated by people simply for existing, and thus he did not let it get to him. At lunch on the next day, Saelith naturally found her way to the mess hall, and sat in front of Eric with a wide smile on her pretty face. She had not said a thing about their kiss since it had happened. Until now, that is. I'm glad to see you didn't get into trouble because of me. I know how serious your race treats incidents like that, and the last thing I wanted to do was cause any trouble for you. Can you please forgive me? Just when Eric was about to say that there was nothing to forgive, he saw the figure of a man he was not expecting to see enter into the mess hall. An enormous smile appeared across Eric's face as he entirely ignored Saelith and her apology, before rushing over to the entrance to the mess hall. Eric wrapped his arms around the man's back and hugged him tightly before screaming in excitement. Carl! What the hell are you doing here? It's been too long. How have you been? Carl immediately smiled and shook Eric around, as he expressed his joy at seeing his old friend. Haha, you magnificent bastard. I knew you were still alive. Frederick and Dolph owe me 10,000 creds each. As for why I am on board your ship, I have been transferred. I will spare you the details, but let's just say my CO got extremely pissed at me for something that was completely out of my control, and so he transferred me. This sudden news shocked Eric, though he was happy he would not be able to regularly interact with one of his few friends in this unforgiving universe. He was more shocked that Carl was surprised to see that he was still alive and was quick to interrogate the man on that subject. I'm sorry, what? What do you mean? Why wouldn't I be alive? Carl looked at Eric funny, before expressing his thoughts more clearly. His light-hearted nature seemed to have shifted to a more grim tone as he did so. Well, you know that not everyone who died in the war came back, right? I mean, there were times where our fleets were pushed beyond the borders of our data ships. Because of this, some of the guys who died were not cloned. After all, they did not receive the signals which were supposed to inform the cloning facilities to revive them. You haven't contacted us in so long that the guys and I made a betting pool. I was the only one who actually betted that you were still kicking. After all, I saw you in that tournament. There was no way these Red Devils would have been able to kill you. It was only now that Carl noticed Saelith eyeing Eric with pouty eyes, which he was quick to mention. Hey dude. That succubus is eyeing you right now. Do you want me to tell her to fuck off? Succubus was a derogatory term that many of the Germanic soldiers used to refer to the female members of the Dvakian Republican Guard who were now serving aboard the fleets of the Germanic Star Empire. Not every soldier in the Germanic armed forces was as open-minded as Eric. In fact, many of them still viewed the Dvakians as enemies and outsiders. After all, it was not that long ago that they were fighting a war with each other. Karl appeared to be one of these men, which surprised Eric, as he quickly defended Salith from his bigotry. Hey, don't call her that, man. Salith is. She's a friend of mine. So don't you dare disrespect her like that. Karl took another glance at Salith, and the way she was looking at Eric, causing a look of astonishment to overwhelm the man, as he stared at Eric in disbelief before uttering his thoughts aloud. No way. There's no fucking way you got lucky with a hot alien babe for a second time. Eric immediately stared at Karl and silenced the man. He then looked around to see if anyone had heard him, before reprimanding his friend for nearly causing a misunderstanding. It's not like that, you moron. Are you trying to get me killed? We're just friends. That is all there is to it. Karl scoffed, clearly not believing a word that Eric had said, before lecturing the man about his bad habits. Just like how you were just friends with that babe, right? Not buying it, dude. Just look at the way she is looking at you. There's clearly something going on between the two of you. You've got to introduce me. Maybe she has a friend you can hook me up with. Come on, man, I'm dying out here. You may not know the pains of being an eternal virgin, but have some fucking empathy. Eric shoved Karl away from him, before reminding the man of the consequences of what he was trying to do. Bro, do you have a death wish? You know that such a thing can get you a death sentence, right? Besides, the Dvakians are almost as strict about that as we are. Even if Salith had a friend who is half as hot as she is, it is unlikely that she would ever consider being intimate with you. I don't know if you are aware of this, but Dvakians mate for life, dude. Karl looked at Eric with suspicion in his eyes. The fact was that when it came to xenobiology, the Empire only cared to learn the best ways to kill alien species. They did not regard things like mating habits to be worthy of intellectual pursuit. The fact that Eric knew this only increased Karl's certainty that the guy was boning Salith, which he immediately voiced aloud. Okay, you're telling me you know something as obscure as Dvakian mating habits, but you two aren't hooking up? Not buying it, bro. Eric truly didn't have a response to this. He didn't even think about the Empire's lack of knowledge on such a subject, and thus he merely averted his gaze, refusing to comment any further. Eventually Salith got sick of pouting in silence, and approached Eric, where she immediately requested an answer to her previous question. Eric. You left me all alone at our table. And you still haven't answered my question. Eric's silver eyes quickly shifted their gaze between his two friends. He had to be careful how he answered this question, or Karl would never be convinced that they were just friends, and thus he sighed heavily before saying the bare minimum that he could get away with. You don't need to worry about that, Salith, it's fine. Just don't do it again. Karl eyed the two lovebirds with suspicion, before forcefully introducing himself to the Dvakian beauty. I'm Karl, by the way. Eric and I attended the academy together and are pretty good friends. I hear your name is Salith. It is a pleasure to meet you. Salith had barely heard what Karl had said, because she was too busy pouting over the idea that Eric had told never to be intimate with him again. But that wasn't possible for her. After all, everywhere she went, she could smell the mark she had placed upon him, something that would never wash away. Hell, even when she slept, she could sense his presence, which helped soothe her. This wasn't even taking into account the fact that the two of them were going to be on the same ship together for many years. If she could not further express her feelings properly, then she might actually go mad with lust. Hell, even at this moment, she wanted nothing more than to kiss Eric, but she was forced to control herself, because if either of their two species witnessed them together, it could only spell trouble for the two of them. She damn nearly got herself exiled, and Eric executed the last time she let her feelings get the better of her, a mistake she refused to ever make again. As for Eric, he could tell that he had seriously offended the girl with his remark, and thus he blushed over so slightly as he looked away and communicated something that only Salith managed to hear. Okay. Maybe when we are alone we can do that again. And more. At first Salith thought that she was mishearing things, as Eric had appeared to have said in a voice so low that nobody else appeared to have heard it, not even the man who was standing in front of them. But the look on his face confirmed that he had indeed said such a thing. Naturally, the Dvakian beauty was unaware that Eric had the ability to communicate his thoughts with this mind, and thus she just assumed that he had indeed said the words, but in a way that only she managed to hear them. As a result, her pouting expression immediately shifted to one of excessive joy. She had to force herself from glumping the man, no matter how much she wanted to do so. Chapter 40. A brief vacation. Months passed, and during this time Eric had mostly been working as a flight instructor. His students were members of both the Imperial Navy and Vrakian Republican Guard. And as a result, there were fresh new faces who entered Eric's pool of trainees with each passing day. The flight school, which Eric ran on board the carrier, consisted of a series of simulations, and once the trainees had received their certification through these simulations, they would then move on to practical flight experience. Something which should have been easy, but for whatever reason had proven quite difficult for many of the Dvrakian recruits. Sailith had just barely managed to pass her flight certification, and the moment she got into an actual cockpit, it ended exactly as Eric had expected, with the klutz of a woman crash-landing her dagger in the hangar bay. Naturally, it fell to Eric to discipline the Dvrakian beauty for her failures, which usually resulted in some proper alone time between the two of them. At first the couple had only experimented with kissing and touching, but Sailith's increasing lust became difficult for Eric to control, and eventually he had no choice but to make love to the woman. How long Eric would be able to keep this taboo relationship a secret? He did not know, but he found himself enjoying the time he spent with Sailith more than anything else in his current life. Eventually, 8 months had passed, and the time for Eric's scheduled leave of absence had come. Thus, on the last day of active duty, before he was able to get a break, he popped a question to Sailith that she was not expecting. So, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I actually have a starship of my own, which is currently in storage. I was wondering, since you are also about to go on leave, why don't we take a brief vacation, far away from the borders of the Empire, just the two of us? Sailith looked at Eric with glimmering eyes. She had not expected the man to make such an offer to her. In fact, she was dreading the day that they were finally apart from one another for several months at a time. But, it would appear that her fears would not be realized. Thus, she smiled and nodded her head in excitement before accepting Eric's offer. That sounds wonderful. Assuming you can get the approval, where did you have in mind? Naturally, there was only one part of space Eric wanted to go to more than any other, but he had wanted to do so while single. He couldn't very well spread his seed across the great Una Empire when he was in a rather serious relationship with Sailith, thus he was actually quite dumbfounded when he heard this question, not knowing where they could possibly go for their brief vacation. Sailith could see that Eric was stumped, and thus immediately voiced her opinion on the matter, hoping that he would take it seriously. Well, if you don't already have a place in mind, then there is one place I have always wanted to visit. Although, I highly doubt you will ever get the approval required to go there, considering your people's complex history. This statement had caused Eric to become quite interested in where Sailith wanted to go, and thus he was quick to inquire further about the subject. Well, what were you thinking about? You don't need to worry about obtaining the proper clearance, I have my ways around that. Just tell me the destination which you desire to visit and I will make it a reality, so long as we are able to get there and back in time. Sailith's blood-red eyes darted back and forth, looking for any possible eavesdropping, before whispering about the place she wanted to visit most of all. Earth. Eric recoiled in shock when he heard this answer. Earth was indeed a tricky subject in the Empire. Much of the Germanic society refused to speak about their roots as a genetic offshoot of humanity. The fact that they had been forced to abandon their homeworld and stake their claim out in the galaxy was a source of great humiliation for Eric's people. To visit Earth was practically an act of treason, and if he did succeed in getting there, it would have to be a secret that he would keep for the rest of his life. But then again, the same could be said about his relationship with Sailith. Eric could see the pleading look in the woman's eyes, and was quick to change the subject. How do you even know about that, anyway? It is not exactly common knowledge outside of the Empire. Sailith looked at Eric with confusion in her sanguine eyes before answering him honestly. Well, I read about it, of course. On your interstellar network. There are plenty of chat groups dedicated to reclaiming Earth, and I was curious. I have to admit that I was surprised when I learned that the Germanic race is actually the result of your ancestors fleeing from your homeworld and rapidly evolving your species through mass genetic augmentation. Eric immediately calculated the distance between the Germanic star empire and Earth. It was 1800 light-years away, which would be several months' worth of travel with his current ship. He would also have to routinely stop along the way for refueling in unfriendly sections of space. In fact, now that he thought about it, the navigation charts towards Earth were a closely kept secret by the military. It was not exactly something the average citizen of the Germanic Star Empire could get their hands on. Even if Eric could access that information, the resources required to make the journey were monumental. At the very least, he'd have to invest in a new quantum drive, one that had better performance than his stock model. After several moments of thought, Eric shook his head, and denied Sailith's request, stating that it was simply unfeasible to make the journey at this point in time. I'm sorry, Sailith. There are too many reasons why we won't be able to make that journey, time being one of the primary factors. Maybe someday I will be able to take you there, but for now, it is just not in the cards. The red-skinned beauty immediately began to sulk as she heard this, though she knew little about the difficulty they would have to endure just to visit Earth and return to the Empire alive. She really wanted to see the home world of the man she loved. But she supposed it just wasn't meant to be, thus she came up with another idea, which unfortunately Eric was also forced to decline. Then what about the planet you grew up on? Alemania, right? That's not too far away and is well within the borders of the Empire. You might even be able to introduce me to your family as a friend. There was another hopeful look in Saleth's glimmering red eyes, yet Eric did not share her enthusiasm. In fact, he appeared quite wounded over the suggestion, which immediately caused the woman to become concerned as she inquired about what she had said that made him this way. I'm sorry. Did I say something wrong? Eric took a deep breath and shook his head before informing Saleth why it was not possible to visit Alemania and introduce her to his family. No, it's nothing that you said. It's just that I'm afraid that is also not an option. You see, my father is the sector governor of the region, and he has disowned me for reasons I do not wish to get into right now. Even if I wasn't exiled from my family, the only person who would actually be happy to meet a friend of mine would be my mother, and if she were to find out the truth between us, then even she would be disgusted with me, again. Saleth gasped in shock when she heard this information. She did not know that Eric had been disowned by his family, but she could only imagine what would drive his parents to do such a horrible thing. Even though she knew that Eric did not want to speak about the issue further, Saleth could not help herself, and asked anyway. I know you said you don't want to talk about this, but I can't help but wonder what you did to receive such treatment. It wasn't anything bad, was it? A slight scoff emerged from Eric's lips as he shook his head. There was a bitter tone in his voice as he begrudgingly spoke about what had happened. No, it wasn't anything bad, unless you would also consider our relationship to be a bad thing. To make a long story short, I had a brief relationship with an Ana woman, my father found out, and he disowned me. In all honesty, the whole thing was quite the scandal. There was even an investigation conducted by the authorities. In fact, the only reason I have not been executed is because someone powerful in the Empire buried the story and denied the allegations against me. Even though they were completely true. Saleth had a sympathetic look on her face and was just about to say something when a familiar voice interrupted her. I knew it. You did bang that Ana babe. And here you are hiding your relationship with sweet little Saleth here. You, sir, are a player. Eric and Saleth both looked up in dismay at where the voice had came from, to see that Carl was silently observing their conversation the entire time. He then jumped down from the alcove he was hiding in and confronted Eric with a look of fury in his eyes. You bastard. Why didn't you tell me you were disowned by your parents? I would have gladly helped you out, hell we all would have. When something like that happens, you come to your friends for support. Eric was surprised to hear this come from Carl. He had never informed his friends at the academy what had happened to him during his first winter vacation. Instead, he acted as if everything was still normal for several years. As for Saleth, she was quite upset that Carl had interrupted her, and began to pout in silence, waiting for Eric to finish up his conversation with the man who she considered being a bad influence. However, Carl's next words clearly aggravated her. It's decided, you, me, Dolph, and Frederick, we are going to the Great Ana Empire once we get our leave. I don't care what anyone says. You have a starship, right? How many beds does it have? Eric appeared slightly aghast at Carl's suggestion, but he did not outright deny him, at least not immediately. Instead he entertained him at first. Well, 4, but however, before he could finish his sentence, Carl grabbed hold of Eric's shoulder and gave him a thumbs up before responding. That's perfect. It has been a while since the 4 of us got together, and unlike you, who keeps managing to attract alien babes, we are all still turbo virgins. You are taking us to the Great Ana Empire so that we can finally become men, and that's final. Eric looked over at Saleth for support, but she simply snubbed him, and walked away, but not before leaving her feelings out in the open. Oh fine, forget about me. You go hang out with your friends and screw your way through that entire empire of whore and sluts. See if I care. Immediately Eric ran after the girl, who was clearly upset by the conversation that Carl had started on his own, leaving his best friend behind to feel like an idiot. Wait. Saleth. Come on. It's not like that. Upon seeing Eric scamper off like a whipped hound, Carl reached into his uniform's pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes, which he immediately began to smoke. He stared towards the area that his friend had run off to, before shaking his head and voicing his disapproval. That succubus has you wrapped around her pretty little finger. Chapter 41, blackmailed. The day for Eric's leave of absence finally arrived, and yet, Saleth was still angry with him for even entertaining Carl's suggestion of sex tourism as a vacation idea. Thus, the red-skinned beauty had returned to her home world to visit her parents without Eric. As for Eric, he had informed Carl that he would not be taking him and the boys on a trip to the Great Ana Empire, and instead found himself once more visiting the bars on the industrial world of Quadi, where the carrier he served upon was currently docked for regular maintenance. While sitting in the middle of a bar and drinking his legal limit of beer for the day, Eric was looking at the grid with his mind. In particular, he was reviewing his account balance, which had grown quite a bit after roughly 2 years of active service in the military. If one counted the fortune he had acquired mostly through ill-gotten gains, then Eric would have made approximately 6 million credits since he had first been disowned by his parents, over half of which had gone to the purchase of his ship, and the lifetime insurance on it. This meant that he still had roughly 2.5 million credits left over, which was currently sitting in his bank account accumulating dust. And while Eric could invest a part of this sum into the stock market, he had something else entirely in mind. What Eric wanted more than anything at this moment was a home of his own. One where he and Salith would not be interrupted, where they would be free to be intimate with one another without having to look over their shoulders in fear of the authorities finding out about their illicit relationship. Thus, even though the woman was currently angry at him, he decided that he would search the grid for the purpose of house shopping. The imperial real estate market was complicated, to say the least. While individuals were free to use their earnings to buy larger and more luxurious abodes, the government would provide a basic home free of charge which could house a family of up to 7 people. Of course, one had to be married to qualify for this benefit, and since Eric could not get married, nor could he reveal his relationship with Salith, he would have to find a place that could support the two of them, but was also small and inexpensive enough as to not alert the authorities to his ill-gotten gains. After all, he had committed multiple felonies to obtain his current small fortune. And he did not want to spend the rest of his life in either a penal colony or a penal battalion. And while 2.5 million credits could buy him a fairly nice home on one of the core worlds, or a decent-sized mansion in the frontier, Eric would easily draw suspicion to himself if he dropped such a large sum of credits on a house that he technically did not require. Or so he thought, but, after 30 minutes of drinking while browsing the market, a familiar face sat down next to him. Eric did not believe his eyes as he witnessed the cobalt-haired beauty who had once been his contact in the interstellar crime syndicate known as Splinter. The woman quickly ordered a drink, which she began to chug as if she had not quenched her thirst in months. After finishing the beer with ease, she turned around and looked at Eric with a wry smile on her pretty face before speaking up. "Apex, fancy meeting you here. Do you mind if I have a minute of your time?" Eric's body froze in place when he heard the woman openly refer to him by the alias he had used to accept underworld jobs, and just when he was about to decline her offer, she said something which shocked him to the core. "You're looking for a house, no doubt because you want some privacy with that hot piece of alien ass which you have exclusive access to. Like I said before, I'm not one to judge, and a Dvrakian? Nice choice if I do say so myself. Nothing quite like having a conquered subject serve you sexually, am I right? Anyway, let's talk business. Not only can I help you get a place that would really impress that little succubus of yours, but I can keep the authorities from prying into your business as well. And all I ask in return is a little favor from you." Eric was shocked that this woman had dug up so much damning information on him, and as much as he wanted to shoot her in the face here and now, he simply did not have the guts to do so. Instead, he forced himself to remain calm as he took a sip from his beer before responding with what was obviously a forced expression of stoicism on his face. "I have no idea what you are talking about." Despite the confidence in Eric's tone, the woman simply scoffed before signaling to the bartender to get her and her friend another set of beers. Which caused Eric to immediately glance around in panic. After all, such a thing was illegal. Yet, neither the bartender nor the other patrons actually seemed to give a damn. Once the beers were in their hands, Mirage spoke in a coy tone. "Come now, Eric, there is no need to be so tense. You are with friends right now, friends who are both very powerful and in need of your assistance. If you scratch our back, we will scratch your as well." Mirage then chugged the next beer in the same way she had done to the last one, which the bartender immediately refilled for the woman. Eric was now incredibly anxious. Not only did the woman know about his identity, but she also knew about Salith as well. This immediately put Eric on alert, but he did not make any rash moves. Instead, he voiced his disbelief aloud. How do you know so much about me?" In response to this question, Mirage simply groaned, as if she hated to recall the job she used to do for the imperial government. "If you must know, I used to be what the government refers to as a watcher for the Imperial Intelligence Services. Or the IS for short. My entire job was obtaining information through the grid. You think your talents as a slicer are good? The nanites I received at birth were specifically calibrated for spying on others and slicing into computer systems. I assure you, there is nothing in this universe that the Empire can keep a secret from me. In fact, I have been watching you from the cameras on board your carrier for some time now. I know all about your little taboo relationship, and if you want to keep that secret between the two of you, I suggest you listen to my proposal. Knowing that he had no choice but to listen to the cobalt-haired woman, and accept her job, Eric sighed heavily, before relenting. Alright, fine, I will hear you out. The woman wore a pretty smile as she patted Eric on the back as if they were old friends before complimenting him in a rather conceited tone. Good boy. You see, that wasn't so hard, was it? Immediately after saying this, Mirage's expression and tone shifted to a very grave state, as she leaned in and whispered something to Eric. I have to apologize about that last job. We had no idea there was a mole on our end who had been feeding information to the Vaxcorvian authorities. But thanks to you, we now know who he is, and hence I have a little favor to ask of you. You see, the guy who leaked the information about your last job, he is a high-ranking member of our organization, completely untouchable by a pleb like me. In fact, he is one of my employer's rivals. Normally I would order one of my hitmen to take care of this, but this situation requires an outsider's touch. I need you to take care of that fucking rat once and for all. All I need you to do is take him out. As for the more difficult task of preventing him from being cloned into another body, you leave that to me. If you do this for me, not only will my boss pay you 25 million credits, but he will make sure the authorities don't fuck with you about any potential non-violent infractions that you might end up getting yourself involved with from now on. For example, if someone were to find out about your little relationship with the Drakian girl, we can make those charges disappear. I won't say that you will be a full-fledged member of Splinter after doing this for us, but you will be an associate, and that has its own perks. What do you say? Are you in? Eric sighed heavily in defeat after hearing what he was being extorted to do. He then chugged the remainder of his beer before staring Mirage deep in her blood-red eyes, where he asked a question that he already knew the answer to. And if I refuse? A devilish smile appeared on Mirage's face as she leaned in and whispered something to Eric, which sealed his fate. Then I will leak all the videos I have of you and your little girlfriend to the grid. You two really ought to be more careful. It was quite easy for me to get footage of the two of you in action. I mean, the body on that girl? Wow, I have to give you props. I don't know how you managed to score a babe of her quality. I don't think I need to remind you that you have already been accused of interspecies relations once before, and though I don't know why the Grand Admiral covered for you, he won't be able to do so this time around. After all, with such overwhelming evidence out there in the ether, nobody will be able to deny that you are a fucking race traitor. And that is a serious crime, now isn't it? Though Eric was surprised to learn that the Grand Admiral was the one who had saved his neck, he was more concerned with the sword of Damocles that was currently hanging over his neck. Thus, he sighed heavily once more before he accepted the incredibly dangerous job. After all, if what this woman had said about her background was true, then she most definitely would have been able to get that kind of dirt on him. Though Eric did not know just how far the reach of Splinter went, the more he learned about the shadowy syndicate, the more he began to fear it. Thus, he accepted the job, even though every fiber of his being was warning him not to. Alright, when you put it like that, I guess I have no choice but to accept. Mirage broke out into a cheery smile once more while she patted Eric on the back yet again. Good boy. You will receive the details within the hour, and by the way, I suggest you bring that makeshift piece of crap you call power armor, because your target is going to be guarded by some serious killers. See you around the stars, lover boy. After saying this, Mirage stood up and walked out of the bar. Meanwhile, Eric ordered another drink, knowing that there was a million ways for this job to go wrong. Chapter 42, The Reaper. Shortly after Mirage departed from the bar, Eric received an encrypted message which informed him of the details of his mission. The methods which he used to eliminate the target whose alias appeared to be Spectre were entirely left up to him, but it was recommended that he at least bring a decent set of armor, due to the highly fortified nature of his target's location. What was this location, you might ask? Well, surprisingly, it was not some hidden moon based on the fringes of Imperial space. On the contrary, according to this encrypted message, Spectre was hiding in plain sight in the middle of the Empire's capital. Much to Eric's surprise, the target was located at the Imperial Naval Academy on Germania. Though Eric did not know how this was possible, as only cadets and military personnel were permitted to enter the academy, let alone live on campus, there was no mistaking it. After all, he had spent 2 years in the facility, and as a result, he knew everything about the institution of higher learning. And judging by the file he had received from Mirage, the target was living within officer housing at the Naval Academy. With a heavy sigh, Eric realized that he was being blackmailed to commit a murder on the grounds of a military facility. It was impossible to stress just how dangerous and foolish such a thing was. He could forget about smuggling a weapon through the tight security of the academy, as he would instantly be caught if he dared attempt something so stupid. Nor could he possibly storm the facility and eliminate the target in a coordinated shootout. If he even tried, security would gun him down before he could get past the academy's gates. No, There were only two ways to assassinate his target that Eric could think of, which were remotely likely to succeed. The first option was simply ridiculous, but if pulled off would very well achieve his goal of killing the target, as well as everyone else in a 25 kilometers radius. This plan required Eric to steal a heavy bomber that was armed with a tactical nuclear device, where he would then drop the damn thing on the Academy from the atmosphere of the planet. Needless to say, there were way too many problems to list with why this plan would almost certainly result in his immediate demise. The only other option Eric could think of that would allow him to complete the task he was given was the most likely to succeed, but also had its own risks. And this was to rent out an apartment building which was normally used to house students off campus. If he did this, then he might be able to snipe the target through his window. Of course, this entirely relied on a matter of chance. I mean, what were the odds that a unit with a balcony and direct line of sight of Spectre's house was even available for rent? Still, this was his most likely chance of not only completing the job but also surviving the aftermath. If Eric did this, then he would first need to acquire a sniper rifle, one that was capable of piercing through the transparent metal which the Empire used as windows in most of its military and civilian structures. Which would mean he would need to get his hands on a long-range handheld railgun. And while he knew exactly where to purchase one of these weapons, it would take him a full month just to get there and back to Romania. His second obstacle would be that he would need to either rent a unit via the use of false information that had a direct line of sight to his target, or commit another felony in the form of breaking and entering, where he might be able to use someone else's apartment to pull off the assassination. Both of these options came with their own risks. For now, Eric decided to first get his railgun, along with the specialty munitions he would need to punch through his target's windows, and kill him with absolute certainty. Thus, he immediately set out for the outlaw outpost where he had initially acquired his armor and railgun pistol in the first place. 2 weeks passed before Eric finally arrived at the facility. This time, his landing was much smoother as his ship's information was registered in the outlaw database. Eric landed in the facility, well dressed in his makeshift power armor, before making his way to the weapons store, where he began examining different sniper rifles. The price tags on these things were insane. He was easily going to spend a minimum of 50,000 credits on one of these things, but that was a drop in the hat compared to what he would be making from the job. The store clerk could immediately tell that Eric was not exactly the most experienced man when it came to handling firearms, and was quick to approach him with an offer of assistance. "Tell me what you're looking for, and what kind of firepower you need, and I will get you hooked up with the right gun for the job." Eric's face was concealed by his power armor's helmet, and thus, he did not bother hiding his intentions while he revealed what he needed and why. Assassination job. I have a high-value target in need of elimination, one who is protected in a military facility, within officer housing to be precise. I need something which can be fired from a distance of under 1,000 meters and can punch a hole through whatever the hell it is that they make their windows out of. Eric could hear the man suck on his teeth as he heard the kind of job that Eric was trying to pull off and was quick to comment on the situation. That, my friend, is a tough one. Military housing is designed to be robust, and immune to most forms of attack. But I might just have what you are looking for. I'm not going to lie, this weapon will cost you a pretty penny, as will the ammo that it fires, but I'm telling you it'll do the job just fine, and then some. Hold on, let me look in the back to see if I still have the damn thing in stock. After all, it is not every day that some cunt comes in here trying to assassinate a military officer. A few minutes later, the store clerk came back with a giant container in his hands. Eric seriously believed that the only way he was able to carry such a thing was with the exoskeleton which the store clerk wore. However, it took no effort for the man to unlatch the locks on the container before revealing a large bullpup railgun sniper. Unlike the revolver which Eric carried with him, this thing was clearly designed from the ground up to be a railgun, which meant it was highly illegal to possess as it was a military weapon from a more primitive era, one that should have been demilitarized decades ago. The man handed the sniper rifle to Eric, as if it weighed no more than a stick of cotton candy, to which Eric was surprised to see how light it was, and while Eric looked down its scope, he could hear the store clerk speaking to him about its features. "We call this thing the Reaper. It fires an 8mm depleted uranium projectile at a velocity of roughly 5 kilometers a second. So, unless your target is in a fucking tank, sayonara, baby. Now this bad boy is equipped with a MK262 auto-correcting optic, which means all you got to do is lock onto your target and pull the trigger. The gun will do the rest. Oh, and I should warn you that thing has a fucking hair trigger on it. It will go off even after receiving the slightest bit of pressure, so be careful. Considering you said your target is under 1,000 meters away, I'm assuming you're going to be shooting this thing in an urban environment. So I should warn you in advance, when this thing goes off, everybody, and I mean everybody in a 5-kilometer radius, is going to hear it. So, My first bit of advice is to wear some proper ear protection, and second, the moment you confirm your kill, abandon this piece of hardware, and flee from the scene of your crime. Because after you shoot this thing just once, the authorities will be on your ass with a kill team in a matter of minutes. And in case you haven't noticed, this weapon is hardly what I would call concealable. Eric nodded his head in understanding as he posed the immediate question he had about the weapon. How much does this thing cost? The store clerk then chuckled before commenting on the high price tag that such a powerful and rare piece of military hardware commanded. These things don't exactly grow on trees, if you know what I mean. In fact, this is the last Reaper I've got in stock, and once it's gone, I won't be getting another. Like I said before, it is going to cost you a pretty penny. Eric shifted his gaze towards the store clerk and lowered his voice in a stern tone as he posed his question again. How much? The store clerk did not seem the slightest bit offended. In fact, he seemed rather happy that somebody was finally interested in this relic of a forgotten age, and finally voiced the price. For the weapon, the optic, and a magazine's worth of ammo, you are looking at $250K. And no, I am not going any lower than that. The trouble I had to go through to get my hands on one of these is worth at least that much. If I didn't have such a hard time selling this fucking beast, I would be charging you a premium. Are you interested or not? Eric was utterly astonished by the price tag of the weapon and immediately lashed out at the clerk over the idea of abandoning such an expensive piece of hardware. You're telling me, I have to pay you $250K for one shot of this thing, and then abandon it to the authorities? The fact that Eric had even asked this question proved to the clerk that he was indeed a novice when it came to jobs like this, and thus the man was quick to voice the consequences of not discarding the weapon after its use. Listen kid, I can tell you are new to this sort of thing, so allow me to inform you of what exactly will happen if the government's goons take you out. You do not get the sweet freedom of death like you might think. Oh no. You will wake up in the body of a clone within a fucking prison colony on some god-forsaken asteroid, where you will spend the rest of your miserable life doing nothing but mining. So if you value your freedom like I do, I highly recommend you discard this weapon, or else you will find out just how painful a life of confinement really is. It physically pained Eric to spend such a vast amount of money on a weapon he would only be able to use once. And such a powerful one at that. But he had no choice. The man was right. Freedom was far more important than the $250K he would spend on this beast of a weapon. Thus, he begrudgingly paid the price for the weapon, optic, magazine, and a box of ammo, before stashing the weapon away in his ship's armory, where he then immediately headed for Germania. At this point in time, Eric was severely regretting ever accepting that damn smuggling job from Splinter, because now that they knew everything there was to know about him, he could no longer escape dangerous and highly illegal jobs like this. Rather, once he proved his worth by completing this mission, Splinter would continue to blackmail him into making use of his services. The very idea that he had gone from a special forces pilot to a drug smuggler, and finally a hitman for the mob, filled Eric with dread. After all, what would his beloved mother think if she were to find out that he was engaging in such horrendous crimes, and at such a young age too? Well, Eric immediately put these thoughts to the back of the mind, because they instantly made him bitter towards his father, who had, at least from his perspective, forced him onto this path of crime, which ultimately led to murdering a fellow military officer, even if the man really was a gangster behind the scenes. Chapter 43, Assassinating Spectre. Eric stood on the planet of Germania, while gazing up at an apartment complex, one which he would make use of to assassinate a fellow military officer on behalf of the interstellar crime syndicate known only as Splinter. He was dressed in a solid black flight suit, which acted as a base for the concealable body armor that he wore beneath some standard civilian clothes. On his head was a low-profile flight helmet, which was concealed by a large black hood. Currently in Eric's hands was the container which held the weapon he intended to use for his upcoming assassination. After taking a deep breath, he stepped forward and entered the apartment complex so naturally that it appeared that he actually lived there. After taking the elevator to the 9th floor, Eric stepped out into a long hallway, which was illuminated by a series of lights embedded in the roof. He then reached the door to the unit he had scouted out in advance and knocked on it 3 times. Since the moment Eric first appeared within the vicinity of the apartment complex, he had covertly sliced into its security network, and put its camera feed on a loop. Thus, none of the cameras in the hallway were able to detect his presence as he confirmed that the unit was currently empty. After knocking 3 times and waiting for an answer that never came, Eric effortlessly opened the door because he had already infiltrated the security system, allowing him to unlock any room within the building that he so desired. Once inside, he locked the door behind him, and shut off all the lights which had instinctively lit themselves upon the entrance of the intruder. Just to make sure that nobody was home, Eric laid down the container which held his sniper rifle inside and proceeded to sweep through the building with his modified railgun revolver, before finally sighing in relief when he confirmed that nobody else was present. After which, He immediately opened the shades of one window in particular, where he began to set up his sniper rifle on a tripod so that it was facing the home of his target. In particular, a window which led directly into the man's dining room. Once Eric had confirmed that he was facing the correct house which his target was known to live in, he lied in wait for 3 hours before the man finally revealed himself. By now it was getting late, and while the faculty of the Naval Academy had returned to their homes, which were located on campus, the students were out socializing. Eric had stared down the sights of his optic for 3 whole hours without moving a muscle until finally his target came into sight, and when he did, Eric suddenly lost the will to pull the trigger. The man who he was supposed to kill was none other than his old galactic politics teacher, Commander Vernoekberg. The shock and dismay that Eric felt nearly overwhelmed him as he realized that one of his favorite teachers who had instructed him during his tenure at the Naval Academy was in reality a high-ranking member of an interstellar syndicate, and a rat at that. He stood there in disbelief and panic while the auto-correcting optic locked onto the man who had sat down at his dining table and began to sip a cup of coffee, which his wife had just brewed for him. Standing by his side was a beautiful Germanic woman, and several young kids who were no older than 10. They sat down at the dinner table beside their father and talked about the peaceful days that had just enjoyed. Tears began to stream down Eric's eyes as he struggled to do what was necessary. If he did not pull off this job, then he was effectively condemning himself to death. But if he pulled this trigger, he would be killing a man he respected, and in front of his loving family, no less. Just when Eric was about to pull his finger off of the trigger, the door to the apartment opened, revealing a young man, no older than 19, who stood in shock as he gazed upon the masked sniper who was about to kill a man. And when the door opened, Eric's trigger finger instinctively jerked as a result of his nerves just enough that it pulled the trigger, and thus sent the 8mm depleted uranium projectile down range, and through the skull of his target, instantly killing the man in front of his family. The sound of the railgun's shot was deafening, even to Eric, who was wearing high-grade military hearing protection. It was so loud that the cadet who had entered the apartment fell to the ground, and clutched his ears in agony, which were now bleeding from his perforated eardrums. It took Eric several seconds to realize what he had done, and when he did, his body instinctively took control over his mind, and forced him to run away from the scene of his crime, which was no doubt having a government kill squad sent to its location at his very moment. The entire city block was acting like an atom bomb had gone off within its vicinity, as alarms were ringing across the area, and people had burst from their homes in search of the cause. Yet Eric was relying entirely on instinct at this point, and had used the survival evasion resistance and escape training to run from the authorities, which had drilled into his mind and muscle memory during his tenure at the Naval Academy. Within no more than 2 minutes Eric could see a shuttle approach the building where the shot had gone off, as heavily armored Star Marines entered into the apartment which he had used for his crime. Knowing that the government kill squad was already nearby, Eric skillfully dashed through alleyways, and evaded even the slightest bit of detection, while his mind accessed the nearby security systems that every building had, and in doing so buried any trace that he was ever in the area. Eventually Eric made his way to the starport, where he was no longer being pursued by the government kill team. He had no idea how he had successfully evaded them and had no memory of what happened immediately after firing the shot. All he knew was that the moment he left the atmosphere and activated his quantum drive, that he was completely and utterly dead inside. Commander Vernoekberg was a good man, an honorable man, one who had clearly been working with the IS to infiltrate Splinter, where he had climbed through the ranks to the point where he was able to effectively bring down many of its operations. And Eric had just killed him in front of his family. The guilt which Eric felt inside at this moment was like a poison, which slowly gnawed away at his mind as he rapidly descended into madness. Just when he thought he was going to lose the last shred of his sanity, a notification appeared on his Neuralink, which revealed that he had received a substantial payment of 25 million credits, and a request to meet up with his syndicate contact. At first Eric did not even want to think about meeting with that horrible woman. But after several seconds of thought, he realized that more than anything he did not want to be alone to deal with his thoughts, and thus, he messaged her that he was inbound. Where he immediately headed back to the world of Quadi where she was waiting for him. By the time Eric arrived in Quadi, he smelled like a winery, having drunken multiple bottles of his azure and palm wine. When he entered the bar, Mirage looked at his haggard appearance with a hint of pity in her scarlet eyes. After patting the seat next to her, indicating that she wanted Eric to sit beside her, she waited patiently until the man obeyed. Eric did as he was commanded, where immediately after the attractive young woman ordered for the bartender to bring the man a special drink. "Oi, Franz, bring my boy here some of the good stuff, and pronto." Immediately the bartender went into the back of the bar where he retrieved a solid vial of what appeared to be a white milky liquid. Eric had never seen this before, and thus slurred his words as he held it in his hands. "Is this milk?" Mirage did not say a word, instead she swiftly opened up the vial, and stuffed it down Eric's mouth, while messaging his neck so that he was forced to swallow the entire shot in one go. Immediately Eric felt like the severely intoxicated state he was previously in had suddenly vanished, and was replaced with a burst of energy that was at the highest levels he had ever felt before in his life. Eric felt the need to either get into a fistfight with the first man he made eye contact with, or viciously fought the first women he laid eyes upon. After seeing this intense reaction, Mirage giggled while responding to Eric's sudden burst of energy and aggression with a slight shake of her pretty head. Everybody has a different reaction when they first take vitality. Sit down, Eric, we have things to discuss. Contrary to what she was expecting, Eric did not do as she had instructed, and instead immediately grabbed hold of the cobalt-haired woman's chin and kissed her with intense passion, to which she responded by grabbing hold of her stun gun, and shooting it straight into Eric's solar plexus, which dropped the man to his knees. Unlike what Eric had expected when he was forcibly kicked down from his intense high, the woman smiled before grabbing hold of Eric's chin, where she began to tease him with a seductive tone. Easy there, tiger. If you still want to have some fun after we have concluded our business, then I am all for it, but I doubt your little girlfriend would approve of such a thing. So, now that you have come down from high, sit down, we need to discuss some things. Eric did as he was instructed, but could immediately feel his negative emotions attacking his mental state, something which Mirage took notice of, and thus responded for perhaps the first time in her recent memory with a sympathetic tone in her alluring voice. I know what you are probably thinking. You think that Spectre was a good and honest man, who was working with the authorities to bring down our little organization. Well, the good news is, none of that is true. Eric gazed over at Mirage with an astonished look, as he quickly spoke about his concerns regarding her statement. But I knew calm before he could finish his sentence. Mirage placed her dainty index finger on his lips and shushed him while continuing her train of thought. First off, when we speak about the man, we call him by his alias. Secondly, no, he was not working for the IAS. If he was, you can damn well believe we would have taken care of this delicate matter in-house. No, Spectre was a rival of my employer. He was not what he appeared to be to the public. Spectre was a filthy murderer, a drug peddler, a piece of shit sex trafficker, and a fucking rat. If that man was working for the IAS, he would have informed them about your little delivery so that you could be picked up on your way back. But instead he ratted you out to Vaxcorvian Customs, not because of some sense of honor, or justice, but because he wanted to hurt my employer's operations. I won't bore you with the political structure of our organization. It is incredibly complex, and quite dull, if I'm being honest. But there are some things that you should know. For example, working for every underboss is a gang of hardened criminals who are loyal to him. And these gangs are competing with one another for the favor of the man in charge of it all. So, you don't need to feel bad about what you did. Spectre had it coming, and by the way, in case you are still having doubts about what you just did, then you should know that the sick bastard sold his own 12-year-old daughter into slavery. I will leave what kind to your imagination, and yes, his bitch of a wife was in on it too. So cheer up, kid, you did an amazing job, and took out a real scumbag while you were at it. The galaxy is a better place for what you just did. I mean, sniping the fucker from a cadet's apartment, with a fucking Reaper no less. Goddamn, I wish I could have seen it. It's just a shame that the authorities now have their hands on such a fine piece of military hardware, but at least it got the job done. Although he did not know whether or not Mirage was making this whole story up for his benefit, or was actually telling the truth, Eric chose to believe it, because by believing this particular tale, he was able to live with his actions, and even take a bit of pride in them. The only thing he regretted was that those kids would now be scarred for life after watching their dirtbag of a father get his head blown off in front of them. But, if that didn't harden them up for the harsh realities of the galaxy, then Eric did not know what would. Chapter 44, No Rest for the Wicked. Eric continued to stay in the bar, and drink with Mirage for some time, as they chatted about the job that he had just pulled off. In fact, one of the things he was most curious about was how the cobalt-haired beauty had managed to prevent Spectre from being revived in a cloning facility, which he almost immediately asked about after she confirmed that the target of his assassination was well and truly deceased. Okay, I know that I sniped the target and took him out. I mean, even the nanites in his bloodstream could not have repaired that kind of damage, nor could a medbay. But how did you prevent the guy from just reviving in a cloning facility? I mean, that's what happens, right? After we die, our memories are transplanted into the body of a clone. So how did you guys stop that? Mirage had a curious smile on her pretty face, as if she was debating internally about whether or not she should actually say something about this matter. Ultimately, after several moments of silence, she sighed heavily and chugged her beer in a matter of seconds, as Eric had witnessed her do several times before. Once she was done, she told Eric what he wanted to know. Alright, you remember how I told you before that I was once what the IS refers to as being a watcher? Essentially, What this means is that I was born and bred to spy on the citizens of the Empire via the grid, and their neural link systems. I'm going to be frank with you, there is a very small percentage of the population who knows this, so what I'm about to share with you does not leave this room. But, essentially, everything you do in life is recorded, and stored in your neural link, literally everything. That's how it was so easy for me to find out about your little secret. By the way, I must say, you have an impressive physique for a man who was genetically modified at birth to be an ideal starfighter pilot, and not something like say a star marine. Anyway, the point I am trying to make is that a really good watcher, such as myself, is entirely capable of accessing that data storage. And believe it or not, I can do so much more. I'm talking about everything from managing your vitals to controlling your actual memories. Hell, I even have the ability to manipulate the biological functions of your body. If I really wanted to, I could slice into your neural link, and make you cream your pets right now. Not that I would actually do that. So for someone like me, it was incredibly easy to slice into Spectre's neural link and disrupt the cloning signal from reaching its targeted destination. All that was left was for someone who is more capable of violence than I am to take him out. Which is where you came in. Eric looked in horror at the beautiful mutant woman who was smiling at him, as if the incredibly daunting news she had just told him was the most natural thing on the planet. He was amazed that someone with her abilities even existed and, as a result, was filled with so many questions, the first of which he could not help but ask. So you are telling me that Imperial intelligence just let someone as valuable as you slip from their fingers and enter the criminal underworld? Mirage scoffed at this remark before chugging another beer, where she immediately correcting Eric on his error. Of course not. Do you have any idea how difficult it was for me to flee from the clutches of the EAS? I was literally a slave, forced to do the bidding of the party, and spy on the citizens of the Empire all day, every day. Do you know how many people were punished for stupid shit because of my abilities? No, I had to fake my death and run away, which was not an easy task to pull off. Luckily, Butcher found me while I was all alone and hiding in some distant corner of the Empire. If it weren't for him, I'd be dead by now. Now I only spy on outlaws like yourself. And occasionally on a few celebrities I follow. You would not believe who has a crush on you, even if she is not willing to admit it yet. Eric neither knew nor cared who Mirage was referring to, and instead asked a far more important question that he had on his mind. So if the IS has more people like you, then you're telling me that they could very easily find out about all the illegal shit I have been doing. If that's the case, then why aren't I already on the chopping block? Once more Mirage scoffed as she looked at Eric as if he were a bit full of himself before responding to the man in a conceited tone. Look at you, you managed to pull off 3 successful jobs in the underworld, and now you think you're some kind of big shot. Kid, they have much bigger fish to fry. In fact, I would not be surprised if a small-time thug like you hasn't even managed to appear on their radar yet. Which, by the way, let me fix that for you. After saying this, Mirage leaned in and kissed Eric, which greatly startled the man. He tried to pull himself away, but found that the woman had latched onto the back of his head quite tightly. She continued to kiss Eric for several seconds, and quite passionately at that before releasing him, where she then wiped the saliva from her lips before licking it in an incredibly seductive gesture. After doing so, she made a particularly suggestive comment in order to put the bewildered man at ease. Damn, that little succubus of yours is quite the lucky woman. Oh, relax, it is just a kiss. You have done far worse already. Consider yourself lucky that this was the only payment I asked for after what I just did for you. Because if you were single, I would have demanded that you to repay my services with that incredibly hot body of yours. This statement caused Eric to be filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. He even had to forcibly calm his hands from shaking, which he only managed to accomplish after Mirage grabbed hold of them with her own. Eric then looked straight into the woman's blood-red irises and asked the immediate question that was in his mind. What the hell did you just do to me? A seductive smile appeared on the woman's near-flawless face as she leaned in and whispered to him. Now the only watcher who will be able to spy on you is yours truly. I look forward to watching your growth, Apex. And maybe after you have decided to stop fucking around with alien sluts and instead choose to finally embrace your own kind, we can have a little dalliance of our own. After all, wouldn't it be an incredibly exciting middle finger to the party if we conceived a little mutant of our own? After saying this, Mirage got up and left the bar, leaving Eric in a state of astonishment. He did not know what he had done to get such a terrifying and beautiful woman to take an interest in him, but he supposed she was just incredibly loose, and this was merely his turn on the carousel. This was something he ultimately decided against pursuing. And instead Eric finished beer before heading back to his personal starship, where he planned to check out the housing market. Immediately upon sitting down in his bunk within the personal starship, Eric received a message from Salith from her homeworld, where she appeared to have calmed down. It had been over a month since the last time they talked, And apparently she was quite worried he actually went on that trip with his friends, because she was quite flustered when she saw he was in what appeared to be a starship. Eric. You didn't really go on that trip, did you? Seeing how worried the girl was, Eric immediately grinned with a mischievous smile as he decided to play a prank on Salith for storming out on him over something he had ultimately declined. After doing so, he dug up the old photo he had of him and Yumi before sending it to his girlfriend, all while leading her on about his current situation. Oh yeah, it's been a blast. This is just one of many girls I recently hooked up with. I mean, after all, you did say that I should go on this vacation with the boys. If it was at all possible for the crimson skin of the Dvrakian race to pale with fright, then this most certainly happened to Salith just before she broke out into tears and hung up on Eric. The act of which caught the man by surprise, who immediately called a woman back in an urgent bid to inform her that he was just messing with her. But Salith did not respond, and because of this Eric sent the girl a direct message informing her of the truth, that he had not gone on the trip with Carl and the others, and had stayed behind in the Empire, where he was currently resting in his starship which for the time being was his only domicile. It took nearly 30 minutes for Salith to call him back, and when she did, she was still visibly crying as she chewed Eric out for playing such a mean prank on her. You bastard. I thought you were cheating on me. How could you be so cruel? Though Eric felt like he had taken things a bit far, he was quick to remind Salith that he wasn't the most cruel between the two of them. Okay, I will admit, I may have got carried away with my prank, but you're the one who left me on block for the past month. Any reasonable guy would assume that you had broken up with him and moved on. The fact that I didn't really shows just how well I understand you. It's a shame that you just don't get my sense of humor. Eric then pretended to be offended, which caused Salith to cry even more, as she revealed it was not her intention to keep him on block for so long. It is not my fault. I wanted to contact you and apologize, but my parents are keeping a close eye on me. They received a report from another member of my unit that I have been too friendly with one of my Germanic coworkers. Because of this, they now think that I have been fraternizing with the enemy, and have placed me under total lockdown. In case you haven't realized, it has not been long since our two species fought a war with one another, and many of my people still see yours as invaders, conquerors, and murderers. My parents included. They stole my only means of contacting you. After all, we Dvrakians don't have implants which allow us to connect to the interstellar network with our minds. The implants that Salith was referring to was in fact the nanites which were injected into Germanic citizens at birth, and was more commonly referred to by the term of Neuralink. The fact that she had called them implants showed just how little the Dvrakians knew about Germanic technology. Eric did not even stop to think that Salith might have lost the means to contact him, and felt somewhat bad for being so defensive. While he did not outright apologize for his behavior, as he felt under the circumstances it was justified, he did come to an understanding with Salith and inquire more about what she had been up to. I understand. I did not even stop to think about what difficulties you might be going through now that you are back on your home world. After all, your entire civilization has been turned upside down as a result of our conquest, and I'm sure you must be struggling with where your loyalties are at. You said your parents have placed you under lockdown. You are not being treated as a prisoner, are you? Salith, please tell me that everything is okay. There was a nervous look on Salith's face, and just when she was about to say something, she heard the sound of boots walking down the stairs, to which she immediately whispered in a voice so low Eric barely heard her. I have to go. It is no longer safe for us to chat, but I will contact you when I am next able to do so. But Eric, you should know that things are not as peaceful as they seem to be. There is a revolution brewing, and I think that outsiders are responsible for fanning the flames. Stay safe. After saying this, Salith hung up the call, leaving Eric in a state of bewilderment. He could not understand what kind of trouble his girlfriend had gotten herself into, but he had an urge to immediately fly out to her homeworld and help her in any way that he could. However, before he could do so, he received a priority message from his squadron, calling for an immediate meeting on board their carrier. For whatever reason, he had been called back into service far sooner than he was supposed to. Whatever was happening, it was abundantly clear that another war with the Dvrakians was just around the corner. Chapter 45, Damsel in Distress. In order to avoid an all-out panic, the newly formed Dvrakian Social Republic had followed the same example as the leaders of the Germanic Star Empire and had neglected to inform their population that a Naraka hive fleet was headed straight towards their borders. As a result of this, many Dvrakian loyalists, like Salith's parents, neither understood their government's cowardly actions, nor had they fully lost their will to fight against the aliens who they deemed to be nothing but murderous colonizers. The war had invoked something deep within the Dvrakian bloodline that had not been present for millennia. They were no longer a peaceful and spiritual people. Instead, many of the survivors now desired to drink the blood of their enemies, and there was no greater enemy to the Dvrakian people than the Germanic Star Empire. On the world of Thexgr, a highly armed militia was camped out in a compound that used to be a large mansion which housed Saleth and her family. Saleth's father was a former politician in the Dvrakian Consortium, who, upon the announcement of his people's surrender, resigned from his position in protest. Now though, he was the leader of the Thexkarian resistance, which was one of many revolutionary groups which had popped up within Dvrakian space. He had invested a substantial sum of money into the reconstruction of his family's villa. It was no longer a simple mansion, but was now a military compound with a series of highly advanced bunker complexes. Where did he get the finances, weapons, and materials to build this place? From the Gimdari trade union, of course. As if blessed by the heavens, the various Dvrakian resistance movements now found themselves entirely funded, supplied, and trained either directly by the Golden Tooth Cartel or via its proxies. Many of which were more adept at warfare than a race as physically pathetic as the Gimdari. However, just when Shvarin Tavarian found that his plans were reaching fruition, he received a report from one of his agents who was embedded within the newly formed Dvrakian Republican Guard, that his daughter had done the unthinkable, and taken one of their filthy conquerors as a lover. Because of this, he reached out to Saleth and convinced her to return home after her leave had begun, where he immediately imprisoned the girl in the compound's brig. Shvarin could not believe that his own flesh and blood had betrayed their race in such a disgusting manner, and if not for the pleas of his wife, he would have killed his daughter on the spot just to restore the honor of his bloodline. Saleth never admitted to her deeds, but Shvarin trusted his source, and thus, he would routinely torture the girl for lying to him. He wanted a name of who in his eyes she had whored herself out to. Specifically, because he wanted to personally bleed the man dry, and feast on his flesh. By now, Shvarin and many of his people had become the true devils that humanity once believed existed as a part of their mythos. They wanted their vengeance, and they would have it no matter what the cost. Even if they had to resort to some rather barbaric methods. Saleth was currently stripped naked and bound to the rafters. Her body was covered in bruises, and her tears had never stopped flowing since her discussion with Eric. Still, despite this, she did not dare say a word about who she was just talking to, because if she did, Eric would become the target of her father's vengeance. Shvarin once more whipped Saleth's heavenly figure with a laser whip, an act which scorched her crimson flesh, and left yet another burn mark upon. All the while, he demanded an answer to the question he had asked of her time and again. I want a name, Saleth. Who were you talking to? I deliberately allowed you to escape from your cell to find out who you were sleeping with. I know it was a German. Communications to those wretched fiends are the only ones that we can't track. You will tell me a name. Or I will end your miserable existence, no matter what your mother might have to say on the matter. Yet Saleth continued to bite her tongue while refusing to speak on the matter. No matter how much physical abuse she endured from her own father, she would never rat out Eric to the Thexkarian resistance. This only continued to infuriate Shvarin, who was just about to lash the girl across her pretty face with his chain, when another member of his species entered the room. The man was dressed in a suit of power armor that, while not as advanced as the models used by the Germanic Star Marines, was capable of providing adequate defenses against most Germanic weapons. In his hands was not a railgun, but instead a plasma rifle. It was abundantly clear to Saleth that her father's men were being supplied by outsiders, but she had no idea who. However, the next words the man spoke truly shocked her, as she was finally able to identify the culprit who was trying to cause another war between the Dvrakian race and the Germanic people. Commandant, the trade prince is on the line. He wishes to speak with you about our timetables. There was only one group of people in the galaxy who used the title of trade princes, and the moment Saleth heard this, she immediately chastised her father for his recklessness. Father, please don't tell me you have gotten into bed with the Gimdari. You know what they are like. They will bleed our worlds dry of their resources, and we will be left with nothing. Such a fate is so horrific that it would honestly be better to have the Germanic Star Empire in control. At least they preserve the world which they live upon. While the Gimdari had done much to manipulate galactic society's opinion of themselves, specifically making it a taboo to speak ill of them, many races secretly spoke amongst themselves about how much they despised the goblinoids. After all, there was nothing to respect about a race of greedy, amoral bankers who used their power and influence to subvert and destroy every civilization that they came across. In the long history of the Gimdari race, they had been nomads without a homeworld, and throughout the millennia they had been expelled by 112 different civilizations who had all agreed that they were a subversive parasite that simply could not be tolerated in any capacity. Of course, they never looked towards themselves as the problem, rather, they blamed everyone else for being prejudiced against them. In fact, it was this exact failure to take responsibility for their actions, and change, that had led so many interstellar civilizations to despise the Gimdari race, even if they could only express such a sentiment while behind closed doors. Naturally, Schwerin knew the truth about his new benefactors, but whether he was naive enough to believe that they would not be able to subvert and destroy the independent Vrakian civilization he intended to create, or it was simply arrogance on his behalf, he chose to ignore his daughter's warnings, and instead whipped her across her face, and thus searing the flawless skin of the Vrakian beauty, before scolding her for her words. I would rather be in debt to the Gimdari for eternity, than see those golden-haired fiends prey upon my own beloved daughter with impunity. You have brought dishonor to your family, and one day soon you will pay the price. Salith did not say a word, instead all she wanted was to find a way to contact Eric, and alert him to this sudden and shocking information that she had just borne witness to. Eric was immediately called into the hangar of the carrier which he served upon. Standing by his side were the other members of his unit, while the wing commander had a grave expression on his face as he described the situation at hand. As of this moment, we are once more at war with the Vrakian race, or should I say those separatist elements which have decided to take up arms against our great empire. At approximately 19:00 hours last night, an instructor at the Naval Academy was assassinated. Through means we do not yet understand, his neuralink was compromised, and his memory bank was wiped clean. To put it simply, Commander Vernuk Ekberg is dead, and he is not coming back. The IS believes that the ones responsible were rogue units of the Vrakian Republican Guard who had smuggled an obsolete piece of military hardware, and a dangerous one at that, out of one of our munitions depots, to a rebellious faction located on this planet, Theksker. The Thekskarian resistance is led by a former politician of the Vrakian consortium by the name of Schwerin Tavarian. He is, in fact, the father of one of the pilots who I know that at least one of you has personally trained. We do not know the extent of Ensign Salith Tavarian's connection with the Thekskarian resistance, but we know she is currently located in their compound. From what we understand, the Thekskarian resistance, as well as many of the other rebellious factions, has been outfitted with some serious equipment from what we have determined to be a subgalactic power. However, we do not know the identity of this supplier, and because of this, we do not know the exact offensive capabilities that the Thekskarian resistance now possesses. I won't lie to you. This mission will be dangerous, and the possibility of permanent death is likely, as the Thekskarian resistance has somehow obtained the ability to tamper with our neural link. So, I am looking for volunteers. All of you are more than welcome not to participate in this operation, but for those who do, there is at least a Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross in store for you. Your objective will be to fly and/or protect a dropship to the world of Thexgrand, Govardly, land outside the terrorists' compound. From there, a special forces team will infiltrate the facility and extract the targets. Which of course is none other than Ensign Salith Tavarian and her father Schwerin. Once safely aboard the dropship, you will return to the fleet. The moment that Salith and her father are back on the carrier, they will immediately be sequestered for interrogation, where we will learn about the identity of their supplier, how they managed to slice into our neural link, the extent of their terrorism network, and any assets they may have embedded in the Imperial Navy. I will reiterate, the compound is protected by weapons provided by an unknown subgalactic power. If you are detected and targeted, the chances of suffering a permanent death are astronomical. So, do I have any volunteers? There was only one man who dared to raise his hand, and that was Eric. There were two reasons that Eric had volunteered for this mission, despite the alleged risks involved with it. 1. He knew for a fact that it was not the Thexgarian resistance which had killed Commander Vernuk Ekberg, and 2. He had already planned to rescue Salith himself, and now that he was fully aware of the danger she was in, he would stop at nothing to save her from her own father, and exonerate her of any criminal charges that might be brought against her. Commander Erwin Wolf sighed heavily as he realized that he only had one volunteer. He was hoping for a proper armed escort, but since the rest of his unit were either unwilling, or simply too scared to commit to the operation, he was forced to salute Eric with the utmost respect, before sending the man on his way. Silber, it figures that you would be the one to volunteer for such a suicidal mission. Alright, very well, I hope you know how to pilot a dropship, because one wrong move and you are as good as dead. Everyone else, dismissed. With this said, Eric quickly attached his helmet and entered the dropship, which already had the Special Forces team on board waiting for the operation to begin. He did not hesitate to request clearance for takeoff before piloting the vessel towards the world of Thexker. Chapter 46, Saving Ensign Salith. By the time the dropship came out of Quantum, Eric's heart was beating so rapidly that he believed he might actually suffer a heart attack. Salith was in trouble, and the last communication he had with her clearly suggested that she was being held prisoner by her father, who was a hardline separatist. It had been less than a year since the war with the Vrakian consortium had ended, and already many of the conquered people were kicking up a fuss. I mean, starting a revolution to tear away from the Germanic Star Empire? After such a horrific loss? What madness had compelled them to do something so foolish? In truth, the Germanic Star Empire treated their new Vrakian subjects quite fairly, more so than any other interstellar civilization thought they would. Though the public did not know it, the Germans needed the Dravkians to aid in their war effort against a monumental threat which was rapidly approaching their borders. Because of this, the Germanic Star Empire allowed the newly formed Dravkian Social Republic to maintain quite a bit of sovereignty over its internal matters, even more so than their previous suzerains. What the Germanic authorities had interfered with was the reconstruction of the Dravkian worlds, the Dravkian military, and the governing body of the Dravkian people. After all, they were going to be facing an extinction-level threat in just a handful of years, and because of this, the Dravkians needed to be rebuilt into something that could withstand a Naraka hive fleet. Having a democratic and pacifistic government, when such an overwhelming threat loomed on the horizon, was just asking for disaster. Naturally, the reasons behind these decisions weren't made public, but it was not like the Dravkians were facing any serious form of oppression or discrimination by the new government. Aside from mandatory military conscription, which was happening in the Germanic Star Empire as well, the people were left to their own devices, and the GSE had been paying out of their own to rebuild what they had previously destroyed. With all these things in mind, Eric could not understand why so many Dravkians were willing to take up arms once more, especially after the humiliating and devastating loss they had recently suffered. There was only one thing he could think of, and it was exactly as Salith had tried to warn him about. Some third party was interfering in matters they had no business sticking their nose into. These were the thoughts that flooded through Eric's mind as he skillfully piloted the dropship to the marked location on his nav computer. As he approached the world's surface, Eric activated the dropship's stealth capabilities, which not only concealed their position from advanced sensor technology, but also managed to cloak the appearance of the ship to match its surroundings. This was a specially modified dropship intended for use by special operations, and because of this, it was outfitted with such advanced and expensive features. In fact, the Germanic Star Empire's premier military technology was even capable of confusing the sensors that most near-eye subgalactic powers made use of. Thus, Eric was praying to whatever deity may exist within this universe that the Dravkian separatists did not pick up his position, because if they did, he would be shot out of the sky in an instant. Luckily, a combination of the stealth technology, and the Germanic Star Empire's jamming technology, managed to buy him enough time to land the ship in the drop zone, where the side hatches of the spacecraft opened up to deploy 5 whole fire teams of some 25 special operations soldiers, who were recruited from among the most talented and capable Star Marines to undertake the Empire's most covert and dangerous operations. All Eric could do now was wait for the mission to succeed, or for the command to abort, and flee from the hostile area. Schwerin was in the middle of a call with the Gindari trade prince Bixel Golden Tooth, while unknown to his entire compound. 5 fire teams of Germanic Special Forces, known by the name of Storm Commandos, were rapidly approaching his position. The short and obese goblinoid had a scowl on his hideous face, as he picked at his sharp and gilded teeth with his grubby little fingers. He was clearly displeased with something, but Schwerin did not know what. At least not until he finally spoke. "My spies report that you have taken the liberty to assassinate an officer within the Germanic Navy. May I ask why, out of all your possible targets, you killed a school teacher?" The leader of the Dravkian separatists scoffed at Bixel with a look of pure ignorance on his face. And this was all that the Gindari trade prince needed to know that a trap had been set against his newest pawns. He was just about to warn Schwerin when the sound of combat echoed throughout the compound. Schwerin quickly looked to the doorway where one of his soldiers entered into the room. His weapon had been discarded, while his armor and flesh were covered in scorch marks. One of his wings had been entirely incinerated, and half of his face was burned beyond recognition. "Commandant. I don't know how, but the Germans have found us. They are here in the compound." After hearing this, a flash of crimson light blinded Schwerin temporarily while the man in front of him turned completely into ash. A look of complete and total rage appeared on Bixel's face as he began to curse out loud in a particularly disgusting voice. "Damn it. Those clever bastards. They set you up. Well, it looks like this is where we part ways. Goodbye, Commandant." After saying this, the communication was cut, and the holographic projection of the obese and hideous goblinoid vanished just in time for the Germanic Storm Commandos to enter the room, where they quickly relayed their information to Eric, who was practically dying of anxiety while waiting for news about Salith. "We have secured Schwerin, but no sign of the bastard's daughter." As for the man in question, Schwerin immediately assumed that his daughter had called for support from the Empire, and began to curse her name in fury, and in doing so exonerating her of the charges she would otherwise be facing. "That filthy race traitor of a whore. She has betrayed me. I knew I should have killed her the moment she stepped foot in my home." Naturally, this statement was recorded, and sent back to Germanic High Command, who were watching a live stream of the entire combat operation from the perspective of the Germanic Storm Commandos' helmet cams. Schwerin was quickly extracted, while combat continued to ring out from the compound. It had even reached the subterranean bunker complex where Salith was currently hanging from the rafters. Her entire body was scorched black from the burns of her father's laser whip, and her face was barely recognizable. If not for the ID tag the Germanic Star Empire inserted into her hand, her rescuers would not easily be able to identify her. It took all the energy in the woman's body for her to look up and scream for help in the Germanic tongue. Her voice was hoarse and raspy, as if she had not been permitted to drink for days. But it was just audible enough to attract the storm commandos who were rapidly advancing through the facility, and killing any Drakian they came across who was not a female. Help. Please. Help me. Salith witnessed a flash of red light outside the door, before it finally opened to reveal two piles of ash, and a man standing in the doorway, dressed in solid black power armor. If one could see his expression behind his tinted visor, it would be one of horror, as he quickly scanned Salith's body not only for information on her vital signs but also on her identity, which he confirmed to be the target he was looking for. The man quickly found something to cover Salith's scorched and naked body with, as he cut her out of her chains before lifting her up and carrying her out of the facility. Though Salith could not see the man's face, she was delirious enough to assume it was her lover, and as she was just about to pass out from exhaustion, she made the mistake of saying his name. Eric. This was naturally sent back to High Command, who quickly did a search for who she could possibly be referring to, and what their relationship was, in association with not only the operation but also their connections to Commander Wernick Ekberg, who was recently assassinated. It took them all of 2 seconds to identify Eric as the pilot who had volunteered for the mission, and this alien woman's flight instructor. Which, of course, left many questions up in the air. Salith and her father were quickly extracted to the dropship, where once the team had finished killing everyone else in the facility, including Salith's mother and brothers, they were given the order to head back to the carrier. And though Eric wanted more than anything to check on his lover's condition, he waited until they were in quantum before posing the question to the medic who was providing immediate assistance to the woman. There was a visible display of panic in Eric's voice, which was also overheard by High Command as he spoke. How is she? Is she going to make it? The medic did not question Eric's flustered state and instead responded in a rather stoic tone, as he explained in detail what had been done to her. Her body is covered in third-degree burns, and she is missing several fingers and toes. Her wings have been completely cut off, as have her tail and horns. It is clear that she has been thoroughly tortured. Even for a bunch of aliens, I can't believe that a father would do this to his own daughter. Fucking savages. Eric gritted his teeth and struggled to hold back the tears in his eyes while he asked the next question on his mind. Will she be alright? The tone in the medic's voice was much more calm, as he placed a breathing apparatus around Salith's misshapen face while injecting her with a med pen, which managed to stabilize her vitals. With this, she should last just long enough to get into a med bay. Though it might take some time to repair all the damage she has suffered, she should be good as new by the end of her treatment. This answer caused Eric to collapse into his chair and sigh in relief, an action which was also picked up by the recording within all the soldiers' helmets, and transferred back to High Command, who began to put the pieces together. The dropship came out of quantum not long after, where Salith was immediately transferred to a med bay for treatment. At the same time, Shvarin was escorted to a holding cell in a secure location of the ship. Naturally, due to the current circumstances of the operation, the Germanic Star Empire could not trust any of the Drakians on board the carrier who might want to eliminate this valuable source of intelligence before he could be interrogated, and thus, he was protected by the Storm Commandos, who would allow nobody else, not even the Admiral aboard the ship, to visit the prisoner. At least not until a time where a dedicated interrogator from the IS could arrive to do his job. As part of these security measures, Salith was also under guard by a fire team of Storm Commandos while she received the medical treatment she so desperately needed. As for Eric, he was not immediately awarded with the Knight's Cross, which he had been promised. Rather, he quickly found himself in handcuffs where he was immediately placed upon a shuttle headed for an unknown destination. He did not know whether the Navy had found out about his relationship with Salith, or whether they had discovered his role in Commander Wernick Ekberg's death. But whatever the reason was behind his arrest, it was for a serious crime. One worthy of the death penalty. Eric did not know how long it took for the shuttle to arrive at its destination. But when he finally arrived, he was surprised to see that he had been taken to the world of Germania, where he was quickly escorted into a building that was unfamiliar to him. Ultimately, the guards forced him to sit down in an empty office, where his handcuffs were removed before being left alone. Another few hours passed, and during this time, Eric had simply sat in his chair, waiting for what he perceived to be his impending execution. Eventually, much to his surprise, the doors opened to reveal a rather handsome and rugged man, who he had never met before. But judging by the insignia on the man's distinctive white and gold uniform, this was none other than Grand Admiral Alarico Emrys, which immediately caused Eric to jump to attention and salute the man. Surprisingly, Alaric simply smiled and responded to Eric's salute with a casual dismissal of formalities. No need for such formalities, Eric. In fact, if I am being completely honest with you, I have been wanting to meet with you for a very long time. Chapter 47, Narrowly Avoiding an Execution. Eric was entirely astonished that the Grand Admiral even knew who he was, let alone wanted to speak with him. He instinctively followed the man's commands as he took his seat, while waiting for Harut to speak his mind. Which came quicker than he thought it would. You have been quite busy, Eric. As a mere cadet, you managed to succeed where nobody else had been able to do so. After nearly 4 centuries, you alone found a way to eliminate the Naruto Hive fleet within a scenario that was designed to be unwinnable. With such a rare talent, I must admit that I immediately took an interest in you, and may have covered for your actions when it was revealed that you had a little dalliance with the aunt of the Ana Emperor. No matter how much the Supreme Leader wanted your head on a pike, I pulled several favors to ensure that did not happen. Then I organized a starfighter tournament to give you a bit of breathing room after your parents had disowned you for your crimes against the Empire. And you exceeded my expectations once again. After your graduation from the Naval Academy, I had you assigned to the Black Sun Squadron, where you proved to be an invaluable asset in the war against the Dvrakians. I must say, I have been rather impressed with your service record thus far. Now imagine my surprise, when after getting your first taste of freedom, you immediately enter the criminal underworld. Though I did not cover for the crimes you committed, they were not serious enough for me to expend the resources to bring you to justice. That is until Splinter hired you to do their dirty work. Assassinating a commander in the Imperial Navy? Now that is a serious crime. Even if he was a crooked bastard who worked for the Syndicate, and sold his own daughter into slavery, such a thing does not excuse your sins. Oh? I can see on your face exactly what you are thinking. How do I know about all of this? Is that correct? Eric was truly bewildered at this moment, to the point where he struggled to find words to speak, and thus he just silently nodded his head with a gawking expression on his face. Immediately afterward, the Grand Admiral smiled before admitting to a vast conspiracy that Eric never thought he would hear in his life. That is because Splinter works for us. Shocking, isn't it? You might be wondering why the government is in league with an interstellar crime syndicate. Well, try as we might, we have found it entirely impossible to completely eliminate crime. It is something in our blood that we inherited from our ancestors that just won't go away. So, what were we to do when the technology exists to freely traverse the stars and commit any number of heinous acts? Well, we looked to the most brutal, and organized criminal syndicate that we could find, and bound them to our leash. This way, they can control the criminal underworld on our behalf, and ensure that the only crimes that happen within the borders of the Empire are non-violent offenses. So that the people may live their lives without fear of the random acts of violence, from no good rotten criminals. Naturally, we were all aware of what Spectre was up to, and though I personally disapproved of his actions, it was not severe enough for me to intervene. That wasn't until he decided to risk everything we have built together, by informing the authorities in a bordering civilization about your activities. Naturally, something needed to be done about that, and it just so happened to have occurred right at the same time that we just so happened to have learned that several groups of Dvrakian separatists had begun popping up across our newly conquered territory. If we were to unjustly crack down upon the Dvrakian Social Republic and its citizens, that would only aid in the separatists' recruitment efforts. But if they were to assassinate an officer in the Imperial Navy, and in doing so, give him a death that was permanent, then we would have every right to begin kicking down doors of suspected terrorists, and the public would not even bat an eye. So, I ordered Spectre to covertly pull off the assassination of a man who I have long since detested for a number of reasons, so that I could blame it on the Dvrakian separatists. Not only did this give us a proper justification to crack down on these rebels, but it was also a way to remind those pathetic outlaws who are really in charge. If they were to ever cause unnecessary trouble for me again, I could reveal their part in the assassination of a military officer, and thus really make their lives quite miserable. Of course, I did not expect that they would beat me at my own game and use you as their sacrificial lamb. Butcher is an incredibly brilliant man, one who despises the Empire and its government. Not that I blame him. After what we did to him and his family, he has every right to be angry at us. You are probably wondering right about now, why would I possibly be revealing all of this to you? Well, you see, as promising as a talent as you have been so far, you have just about used up all of my patience. I have it on good authority that even after being disowned by your parents for having an affair with that Ana girl, you have still not learned your lesson and are now once more engaged in a rather serious relationship with a Dvrakian woman. As much as I do not care for the Empire's mistreatment of mutants such as yourself, or our ridiculous laws on interspecies relationships, especially those that can't possibly result in a pregnancy like the one you have with Ensign Salith, there are trillions of people in this empire who do. And you have already blown your cover twice now. There are already people who are asking questions about your relationship with this woman, and try as I might to bury the evidence of what you have done, Our doctors know enough now about Vrakian social customs and mating habits to understand what you have done. I mean, you are aware that a standard medbay can detect any and all damage done to the body, and can repair even that if requested. As difficult as it might be, I can still make this situation disappear, but this is your last chance. So now you have two options. You can either break up with your little girlfriend and stay away from alien women for the rest of your life. Or, I can ensure that the medbay she is currently recuperating in suffers a little glitch. If that were to happen, then I'm afraid due to the severity of her injuries, she would not make it. Either way, your relationship with the little succubus ends today. It just depends on how you want it to end. So, what will it be, Eric? Having heard everything that the Grand Admiral had to say, it took Eric some time to process all the information that had received in this brief scolding. Whether it was the fact that the Grand Admiral himself had mapped out Eric's career, or the fact that Mirage and Splinter had offered him up as a sacrificial lamb in a power play against the Empire. Eric did not actually care about either of these things. Instead, his mind was drawn to one particular issue, the fact that he would have to break up with Saelith, a woman he had grown to love, once and for all. If that were to happen, then most likely she would be transferred to another carrier in the fleet, and the two of them would never speak with one another again. Though perhaps this might actually be for the best. After all, because they were from two vastly different humanoid species, they would never be able to have children together. Not only that, but with Shvarin in custody, and all of his soldiers dead, nobody would ever know that Saelith had ever had sexual relations with an outsider, especially after the medbay repaired every bit of damage that her body had ever received. Meaning that she could eventually move on from him and marry a member of her own race like she was supposed to. Even if their brief time together as a couple had unnaturally to come to its end, and by his own hand no less, at least Saelith would still be alive. With this in mind, and after several moments of silence, Eric finally sighed and nodded his head. He struggled to hold back the tears in his eyes as he agreed to the Grand Admiral's decision. Very well. The moment she wakes up, I will inform her that we can no longer be together. After an event like this, I am certain that I can spin a tale about it being in her best interest to never see me again. I am thankful that you are giving me another chance to live, even after everything that I have done, and I promise never to interact with Splinter ever again. Despite agreeing to the Grand Admiral's conditions, Eric felt like he had somehow lost everything. He was in a worse state than when his parents had disowned him. Once again, he was all alone in the universe, and the galaxy was a vast and lonely place. However, Alarit's next words took Eric by surprise. That last part won't be necessary. Though you were a sacrificial lamb, I must admit you have somehow gotten into Splinter's good graces. This presents a rather unique opportunity for the both of us. You see, it has been extremely difficult for me to get a man on the inside until now. Naturally, you know where I am going with this. So, from now on, you are my agent on the inside. The next time Splinter decides to contact you, you will accept whatever job they offer, and inform the Is of everything you speak about. You can consider this to be your redemption as a citizen of the Empire. Do this for me, and perhaps one day, you might have that which your heart desires most of all. You are dismissed, Lieutenant, or should I say, Lieutenant Commander. Oh, don't look at me like that. I may have forced you to break up with your little girlfriend, but I am not entirely heartless. As far as I am concerned, you have already proved yourself more than worthy of a promotion during the war with the Vrakians. And if it weren't for that damned fool in charge of your ship holding a silly little grudge, you would have already been promoted by now. When you return to your ship, you can also expect to find a knight's cross with swords and oak leaves in your cot. Consider these two gifts back pay for everything that you have done during your military service thus far. This is your last chance to fall in line. So, the next time I hear about you behaving in a way that dishonors your position, I will have you arrested. After hearing this, Eric was escorted out of the Grand Admiral's office, and back to the shuttle, where he would then be taken to the 13th Fleet and the carrier he served upon. It would take several days for Saelith to recover from her injured state, and during this time Eric would think of the best way to break up with her, in a way that made it so she would never wish to contact him again. Chapter 48, Which Side Are You On? It took 2 whole weeks for the damage that was done to Saelith's body to be fully repaired, and when she was finally permitted to exit the medbay, and the clinic on board the carrier, she immediately found that her world had been turned upside down. After meeting with Eric in their secret hiding spot, the man was cold and distant, which was shocking considering the dire situation Saelith had been in over the last 2 weeks. Just when she was about to ask what was wrong with him, Eric spoke, and in doing so, shattered the young woman's world. Saelith, I'm afraid it is too dangerous for us to be together. What happened to you was entirely my fault, and I can't allow something so horrible to occur ever again. I am afraid that I have no choice but to break up with you. At first Saelith thought that perhaps Eric was joking, and giggled as she patted the man on the back before trying to kiss him. However, he quickly dodged the attempt, and put some distance between himself and the woman he had fallen for. Saleth began to look at Eric differently after that, and immediately asked the question that suddenly came to her mind. "You are serious, aren't you? Eric, you can't do this. I have lost everything. My entire family is dead because they have sided against the Empire. You are the only person that I have left in my life. Please don't abandon me." However, Eric simply sighed and walked away. Though Saleth could not see it, there was a single tear that had managed to get past his defenses, and found itself trailing down the edge of his nose. All the while, he said his last goodbyes. "I'm sorry, Saleth. It is better for the both of us this way. Pretend like I never existed and find yourself a proper Drakkian man to have a family with." After saying this, Eric left the room, much to the astonishment of Saleth, who, after realizing this was indeed her reality, collapsed to her knees and broke out into tears. Eric, however, did not make it far into the hallway, as he fell to the floor and gripped his chest in agony. There was no physical pain. After all, it was not like he was having a heart attack. And yet his beating heart felt as if it had suddenly imploded, leaving nothing but a black hole in his chest. Like Saleth, he now had nobody left in his life who cared for him. Perhaps Eric could turn to his friends in his hour of need, but at a time like this, they were nowhere to be found. Instead, the man was forced to return to his bunk, where he collapsed inside of his cot and passed out from emotional exhaustion. By the time Eric awoke on the next day, he found that Saleth had been transferred to another unit, just like he had expected she would be. The likelihood of the two of them ever speaking again was improbable, to say the least. Especially now that the Grand Admiral was keeping a close eye on him. With his emergency mission completed, Eric now found himself back on leave. And thus, he had an enormous amount of free time on his hands. But life seemed to have lost its purpose without Saleth by his side, and rather than go out and search for a home for the two of them to call their own like he had initially intended prior to breaking up with the woman, Eric instead found himself in the bar that Mirage so commonly visited. Perhaps he had instinctively came to this bar in search of the cobalt-haired beauty. But she was nowhere to be found, and because of this, Eric simply spent his time drinking his sorrows away. He did not know how many hours had passed, or how many drinks he had purchased, but eventually he smelled like a brewery, and could barely keep his head off the counter. It was at this moment that somebody sat down next to him, and much to Eric's joy, it was indeed Mirage. She looked at the man with a look of utter pity on her otherwise flawless face. After sitting down next to Eric, Mirage ordered another hit of what she referred to as Vitality, which was a powerful drug, one capable of countering the intoxication that Eric currently was suffering from. Although this time Eric knew exactly what Mirage was trying to do, and quickly rejected the woman, whilst slurring his words as he did so. "No. I don't wanna." Upon seeing that Eric was refusing her offer, Mirage did the unthinkable, and took the shot of the milky white liquid into her mouth, before kissing Eric. As she did this, Mirage had force-fed Eric the drug, which had an immediate effect on his mind. Clarity rapidly returned to Eric's mind, causing him to come to the sudden realization that he was kissing Mirage. After having just broken up with Saleth, Eric immediately felt guilty about kissing another woman so soon, especially since his heart still only cared for the Crimson Demoness, and thus, he rather violently forced himself away from Mirage. Despite his actions, the cobalt-haired beauty did not appear angry. Instead, she had an expression of sympathy as she spoke to Eric. "I heard about what happened. I'm sorry that you were forced to break up with your girlfriend. But unfortunately for you, that was bound to happen sooner or later. The government has their eyes and ears everywhere. It was only a matter of time before they discovered your relationship with Saleth. But, unfortunately for you, we now have something very awkward to discuss because of this little incident. We know that Emrys has asked you to spy on us." "Oh come on now, Eric, don't look at me like that. The Grand Admiral isn't the only one who has been watching your every move. Perhaps if the Is knew that their most talented watcher was in fact alive and currently working for Splinter, then they would have taken some precautions to hide the contents of that meeting from us. The question now is, where do your loyalties lie? Are you really going to go back to being the lapdog of a government that couldn't care less if you existed?" Eric did not immediately respond to Mirage's question, and simply looked away, an act which caused the woman to sigh before ordering another round of drinks for the two of them. She then posed a question that Eric never thought he would hear in his life. "Eric, come work for us, and I don't mean as a mere pawn, or a sacrificial lamb like before. You may not realize it now, but you are in a unique position to actually do some good for our people. For mutants. I don't know how, but you have managed to gain the Grand Admiral's trust, and in case you haven't been paying attention to these last couple of years, Emrys is now effectively in control of the Empire. As I said before, We know that Emrys has asked you to spy on us, to which we have a counter-offer. We want you to become our double agent. Eric, with your help, Splinter has the potential to evolve into something more than just a criminal syndicate. We could become the change that the Empire so desperately needs. Allow me to give you a fair warning. If you continue on your current path, and maintain your position as the Empire's lapdog, you will get everything you want out of life. You will become a war hero and will be loved by the people. So much so that the Empire will grant you an exception and give you a wife. In a few years, you will probably have family of your own, and everything will be hunky-dory. And then do you know what happens after that? Eric gazed at Mirage with a cautious glint in his eyes. He did not know where this conversation was headed, but so far, the warning she was supposed to be giving him actually did not sound all that bad. That is until Mirage spoke her next words. Eventually there will come a time when you become a thorn in the Empire's side, and when that happens, they will take your family from you and throw you to the wolves. Just like they did to Butcher. A mutant can only go so far in our current society before those in power become jealous and begin to tear him down. I really shouldn't be saying this, but you need to know the truth of what happens to people like us, especially those who dare to challenge the status quo. Butcher was once a starfighter pilot like yourself, a very talented one. In fact, to this day, he holds the record for the largest number of confirmed kills, and is considered to be the Empire's greatest ace. He was so good, that he was even given a wife, which he was happy to start family with. And when he retired from the Navy, he began to climb the political ladder. But as I said before, our current society would never allow a mutant like him to climb to the very top. After all, if such a thing were to occur, the very fabric of the Empire would come unraveled. So they gave him an ultimatum to toe the party line, or suffer the consequences. Naturally, Butcher refused, because just like you, he wanted to make the Empire a better place for mutants like himself. And do you know what the party did? They killed his family, and then of course they tried to kill him too, but he survived, barely. Eric was astonished to hear this story, because from his memory, there was only one mutant who had ever been granted permission to get married and have a family. And that man had been the source of strength that Eric looked to when he was first disowned by his parents. Naturally, Eric was curious to hear the rest of the story, which he was quick to ask about. And what happened then? What did Butcher do after his family was killed by the party? Just when Mirage was about to speak, a very masculine and gruff voice interrupted her from another part of the bar, where a man with crimson red hair and eyes was sitting alone while drinking. Well, he dedicated his life to bringing down the bastards who had murdered his family. But the party is quite insulated, and they have more than a few ways to revive, no matter how hard you might try to kill them. So, he eventually gave up and turned to a life of crime, where he became an underboss in the Empire's largest and most fearsome syndicate. That is, until he heard of a young man like himself, who just so happened to catch the eye of the man who is currently in power. Mirage's expression immediately shifted one to intense dread, as she slowly looked over and saw her employer staring menacingly at the two of them. She could barely find the words to apologize for speaking about his past without his permission. Boss. I'm sorry I didn't. However, before she could finish, the man raised his hand to silence her, which worked like a charm, before he grabbed the drink out of her hand and downed it quicker than she was capable of doing herself. Once the beer was gone, Butcher tossed the glass across the room, causing it to shatter on another wall, where he then sat down next to Eric and wrapped his arm around the man's back. Don't worry about it, sweetheart, like you said, the kid needs to know the truth. While it is true that Splinter is the most vicious syndicate in the Empire, you should know that is mostly filled with mutants like the three of us, many of which are just looking for a place in society to call their own. For the first time since the formation of our little organization, we now have a chance to make some serious changes in society, and it all revolves around you, kid. You may not be aware of this, but the leaders of the party are gone. The cowards fled to the Alphaim Dominion, and I think that I know why. Anyway, all that is left in the Empire is the military, and they are running everything now. I'm no longer an officer, nor am I exactly in good enough standing to re-enlist, and so I don't have the chance to rise through its ranks. But you do. As Mirage said, I want you to become my double agent. I need you to rise through the ranks of the Navy and depose that fucking golden-haired git. Once you are the Grand Admiral, you will control the Empire, because there is no way the party is getting back into power so long as Emrys is in charge, even if we do survive it all. Eric was entirely astonished by the way this conversation had headed. He had so many questions, but could not think just which one to ask first. Upon seeing that Eric was being hesitant, a sly smile formed on Butcher's heavily scarred face as he asked the immediate question on his mind. Time is up, kid. So, which side are you on? Chapter 49, Joining Splinter. Eric remained completely and utterly silent for some time, as he weighed the options on his mind. How could he possibly answer such an important question on such short notice? After all, this decision would impact the rest of his life, no matter how short that may be. Whose side was he on? On the one hand was an interstellar empire, the place he was born in, and was raised to be loyal to. The other was a criminal syndicate with revolutionary goals. Goals, which if they came to fruition, would have a serious impact on his life, and at first glance, they seemed quite appealing. Splinter was founded by mutants like himself, as a means to provide for themselves in an empire which did not give the slightest damn about their well-being. It was not just a brutal crime syndicate, no, Splinter was transforming into something far more chaotic and destructive. Splinter was becoming a political movement, one which Eric severely doubted would be against using violence as a means to achieve their political aims. Eric was one of these people, like Butcher and Mirage. He was a mutant, someone who had been discriminated against since the day he was born, and one who had been abused by even the government itself. If one were to ask him whether he truly felt like giving his life in service to an empire that did not give the slightest shit about him, then the answer was no. In fact, he had been looking for a way to escape the upcoming catastrophe for some time now. However, it was not like Splinter was much better. Their primary means of income were a combination of drug trafficking, gun running, extortion, and racketeering. They also appeared to have engaged in sex trafficking to some small degree. That was a practice that Eric found to be utterly repulsive. Because of this, Eric had a hard time convincing himself to join their side. After all, he would be aligning himself with some of the worst people in the Empire had to offer. But was that a fault of their own? Or had they been forced to such desperate measures by a cruel and tyrannical government which opposed all living beings who did not fit into their vision of the perfect race? If Eric could choose to decline both offers, he would do so in a heartbeat. But if he did tell Butcher to go pound sand, then his corpse would probably be found in a dumpster on another world by sunrise. After all, Mirage had told him he was now on Splinter's network, which meant they could determine if the death he suffered was permanent. But if he chose to accept Butcher's offer, he would be committing an act of espionage against the Germanic Star Empire, which was a crime that would guarantee the next 250 years of his life were spent enslaved in a penal battalion. There he would spend the rest of his miserable existence fighting against the Empire's many enemies, with nothing but a flak vest and an assault rifle. Ultimately, what it came down to was whether or not Eric was truly aggrieved enough by the Empire to act against them. And the fact of the matter was, at this very moment, Eric held a significant hatred for his own people, especially after he was forced to abandon the woman he had grown to love. Perhaps it was the alcohol in his system, which stirred his blood so violently. But, Eric's hands began to shake as he thought about what he had done to Saleth, and in the end, he took another sip of the ice-cold lager before expressing a sentiment which would normally earn him a 10-year stint in a penal battalion. Fuck the Empire. Fuck Emrys. And fuck those cowardly politicians who have abandoned us all. If we do end up surviving Terminus, then I will be damned if I go back to being a good little soldier for a civilization which hates me. Alright, I'm in. I'll do what you have asked. And after I have deposed that cunt and installed my new regime, I will make sure people like us never have to live as the scum of society ever again. After hearing this, Butcher smiled and patted Eric on the back. He was clearly happy that the kid had made the right choice, which he was quick to express in the next moment. You made the right choice, kid. Hey, bartender, another round of drinks over here. Immediately after saying this, the bartender appeared with several more liters of beer, which he handed off to Mirage, Eric, and Butcher, all of whom clanged their glasses together while Butcher made a toast to the future of the Empire. After saying this, Butcher downed the contents of the mug quicker than Mirage could manage. Meanwhile Eric was slurping on his beer to the best of his ability, but no matter how thirsty he may be, he would never be able to match their pace. Eric, Mirage, and Butcher continued to drink and talk of their plans for several hours, until finally, they were kicked out of the bar due to the curfew. If they did not vacate the premises soon, then without a doubt, the planet's security forces would bust down the door and haul their asses to jail. Thus, Butcher was the first to head off as he eyed Mirage with a look of approval. Just when Eric was about to leave Mirage alone, the woman pushed him into the wall and began to kiss him in a fiery display of passion. In between her kisses, she said something which Eric found to be incredibly enticing, perhaps because he was so heavily intoxicated. Forget about all your worries and focus on me. Because tonight I'm going to be your little succubus. Eric awoke the next day, inside a penthouse suite which overlooked the entire city. He did not know where he was, nor did he entirely recall what everything he had done the night before. That is, until he pulled the covers off of his chiseled body, which revealed Mirage's beautiful face resting on his pectoral muscles as if they were a pillow. The woman slowly opened her drowsy eyes and yawned before she glanced over at Eric with a seductive smile. Damn, that was so good last night that I must admit I am incredibly tempted to take you for another ride right now. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure Emrys is having you watched by somebody. So, you're going to have to leave and treat this like a one-night stand. You would be surprised how common those are among mutants. As for what we discussed last night, you don't need to do anything major, or take any risks. Just continue about your military career the way you have been doing things so far, and stick close to the Grand Admiral. No matter what he wants you to do, you do it with no questions asked. You got that? Eric simply nodded his head in silence. He was naturally aware of his responsibilities, but after everything that had happened to him, he felt like he had just gotten off the world's largest roller coaster. First, he was forced to break up with Saleth, and then he found himself acting as a spy on the Empire's behalf, only to accept a job as Splinter's double agent, before somehow ending up sleeping with Mirage. Just what the hell was he doing with his life, that it had ended up in such a pitiful state? Naturally, Eric did not voice any of these thoughts out loud, and instead climbed out of bed and got himself dressed in his clothes. Where he immediately headed out the door, but not before Mirage gave him one last gift. The cobalt-haired beauty grabbed Eric's waist from behind, and kissed him once more, before telling him some good news. You're still looking for a place to crash, right? When you're off duty, I mean. Well, I've got plenty of spare room, so feel free to come back here at night when you need some R&R. Just make sure to lose your tail when you do so, alright? I'll be waiting for you. After saying this, she booted the man out the door, where he simply stared out of the windows and onto the massive industrial city which dwelled below with a lonely look in his eyes. So much had happened since he first left his home in Alemania, and things just seemed to keep getting worse. Eric began to wonder how much longer he had to live, considering the fact that he was now working for two opposing sides, both of which had the ability to permanently terminate his existence. Chapter 50, Sweet Retribution. Several months passed since Eric first joined Splinter, and during this time he did not hear much from his contacts in the criminal underworld. Every now and then he would be forced to perform some menial job, and then report it to the IS, to ensure that the Grand Admiral did not suspect that he had switched sides. But aside from that, the rest of his leave was spent either in Mirage's bedroom, or completely alone. However, while Eric's life had returned to a state of normality, Saleth's father was still being held for interrogation. In a far corner of the Germanic Star Empire, there lay a small facility, constructed on a rather large moon which surrounded a certain gas giant. At first glance, there was not anything remotely interesting on this moon. It had no valuable resources contained within it, nor an atmosphere which was capable of being terraformed. Instead, it was a barren rock. Or so one would think. However, deep beneath the surface of this moon lied a large facility, one where the Empire kept many of its extraterrestrial prisoners. Normally, the Germanic Star Empire would have no business with aliens outside their borders, but there were a few who managed to cause trouble in their sector of space, or very well near it, and because of this, the authorities had built a prison to contain these wildly different species. Deep within this facility was a solitary cell, where Sharingan lay confined to a table. For months now, after subjecting his daughter to some rather vicious forms of torture, in an attempt to learn just which Germanic male she had disgraced her bloodline for, the man found himself in the hands of Germanic custody, where he received far more brutal treatment than he had given his own daughter. The sad truth of the matter is, Sharingan was subjected to the worst kinds of torture imaginable, everything from dedicated neurotoxins which lit his nerves ablaze, to more primitive methods of interrogation such as flaying the flesh from his body. If there was a way to inflict physical and mental anguish on this man, the Empire's interrogators had conducted it. Time and time again, Sharingan would hope for death, and just when the Reaper was about to claim his soul once and for all, he was brought back from the brink of death by the Empire's advanced medical technology, where he was fully restored and then tortured once more. Despite the unspeakable treatment which he had received during this time, Sharingan had not broken. Until now, that is. His mind simply could no longer bear the torment which he received, and finally he revealed that which the Empire wanted to know. It was the Gindari Trade Union. Specifically, the Golden Tooth Cartel. They supplied us with the weapons and knowledge to rebel against the Empire. Pixel Golden Tooth has a particular hatred towards your race, and is trying to use us to weaken your military strength. He says if that were to happen, you won't be able to survive that which is to come. However, it is not just the Dvrakian resistance, he is brewing animosity between several subgalactic powers with the intent of stirring them into an armed conflict against the Empire. We were supposed to work in coordination with these foreign powers when they finally declared war on you. That is it. It is all I know, I swear. So please, kill me. This news had stunned the interrogators who had overseen Sharingan's torture, to the point where they did not know how to respond to this information. Instead, they quickly contacted their superiors, who relayed this information to their own bosses, until finally it reached the Grand Admiral's desk. Immediately, Emrys sought to verify the claims that Sharingan had made, and thus he continued the man's interrogation until he could finally confirm whether or not his words were true. And after 2 weeks of solid sleuthing, the spies within the Imperial Intelligence Services were indeed able to do just that. What this revealed was a conspiracy by a particularly powerful interstellar civilization. One who was on par with the 4 major galactic powers. The fact that the Gimdri had begun to target the Empire was no doubt a result of their refusal to join the interstellar banking system, which the Germanic people have long since, and rightfully believed, was a means for foreigners to gain power over their systems. The fact of the matter was that the Gimdri trade union was now acting against the Germanic Star Empire from behind the scenes, and not only were they supplying separatist movements across the Empire's recently conquered space, but they were antagonizing several subgalactic powers in an attempt to force a conflict to occur. This was effectively a declaration of war, and if the Germanic Star Empire did not have other, more dire concerns that were immediately in front of them, then Emrys would be tempted to respond to these provocations with coordinated terrorist strikes on Gimdri banks across the galaxy. Unfortunately for him, Terminus was months away from reaching the Empire's borders, and because of this, Emrys needed to shelve this idea for a later time. Thus, after discovering this news, his first response was to contact the Empress of the Alphaean Dominion, and alert her to this discovery. Lunaria was, as always, excited to see the rugged and handsome Germanic male's holographic projection. And just when he was about to speak, she confronted him with the words he was not expecting to hear come from her luscious lips. "This is about the Gimdri Trade Union, isn't it? What, are you perhaps shocked to see that I am already aware of your situation? You can relax and focus on more important matters. As we speak, I am maintaining the situation. Those pathetic dregs who clap and bark for those filthy goblins like trained seals will not be a problem that you have to take on by yourself. In fact, I have already sent my delegation to their actual masters, informing them that I will be taking military actions against their vassals if they do not intervene and halt this nonsense. And while those filthy dark-skinned freaks spat in the face of our threat, both the Azure Cabal and the Theocracy have agreed to calm their hounds, and prevent them from attacking your empire. As for that fat sack of pus, Bixel, I have already arranged a little gift for him. One which I am sure he and the entire galaxy will enjoy to their heart's content. After all, it is only fair that after sending his agents to kill my own flesh and blood I have a little fun at the expense of his own bloodline. So, I assure you that he will be more than busy putting out the fire which I have started over these next few months. I suggest you make use of this time that I have given you to prepare your forces, because the Naraku are very near. In fact, I suspect Terminus will be within your newly acquired borders in the next few months. You must be aware by now, Admiral, that if you take this path, entire worlds will die. Even if your species does somehow manage to survive this ordeal, the destruction wrought upon your civilization will have long-lasting consequences." Grand Admiral Emrys nodded his head in agreement with the Alphaean Empress's words before responding to them with a fierce look in his blue eyes. "We are well aware of the projected losses, but the Germanic people remain resolved to fight to the very last man, if need be. We will either survive this ordeal, or die in such a way that the galaxy remembers our people until the very death of the universe. I thank you for dealing with those pesky green-skinned freaks, and I promise that so long as the Germanic Star Empire lives on, we will one day repay this debt." After saying this, Emrys hung up on the Alphaean Empress, who then shifted her gaze onto the little gift which she had prepared for Bixel Golden Tooth, and the galaxy as a whole. However, contrary to what one might expect from the situation, it was not Bixel that Lunaria had targeted for vengeance, at least not directly, but rather one of his daughters. Thus at the moment, in this elven throne room, there was a female Gimdri, who, unlike the male members of her species, was not exactly what one would call hideous or grotesque. In fact, her features were quite cute and attractive to any near-human species. However, she was bound and gagged while wearing a blindfold. Tears streamed down the young Gimdri woman's eyes, as she feared what was about to happen to her. After Bixel had targeted Celestia with his assassins, Lunaria had returned the favor, and kidnapped the scheming Runt's daughter. The Alphaean Empress intended to film a particular lewd scene, one where the young goblin woman would be ganged up on by the political leaders of the Germanic Star Empire, who were naturally wearing masks to conceal their identities. As repayment for the debt which they owed the Alphaean Empress, these men would break the taboo of their race and have their way with this Gimdri woman on film. This film would be sent across the galaxy as retribution for the Golden Tooth Cartel's schemes against the Asterian dynasty. Thus, Empress Lunaria Asterian wore a sadistic grin on her otherwise pretty face as she sealed this Gimdri woman's fate. Let the show begin.